Welcome to Fantasy Audiobook. Fantasy. I can see the rewards. Chapter 71. Semi-Saint. Uncle Zhang smiled coldly and turned a deaf ear. He kept moving his hands and patted Ji Yulingyan. Brush. An old figure stood in front of Ji Yulingyan, and slowly stretched out his arm like a dead branch. Bang. When the two palms touched, no terrifying fluctuations were emitted. All the power was restrained and controlled between the two palms. The two bodies shook at the same time. They each retreated from Ri Shaoji. Fellow Taoist, why be aggressive? The old figure that appeared was a skinny old man, with skin and bones, and a rather hoarse voice. Aggressive. Uncle Zhang grinned. His teeth were white and there was a biting coldness in his eyes. Just because that F who was killed just now dares to attack my young lady, if it doesn't bring harm to your whole family, it is already a mercy of the young lady. The skinny old man looked at him and said, "Don't you know where our distinguished guest comes from?" Zhongzhou. Uncle Zhang took a step forward and stood in front of Yi Qingluan, Yi family. As soon as this statement came out, the skinny old man's pupils suddenly shrank. Naturally, he has heard of the name of the Yi family in Zhongzhou. They are indeed extremely powerful. Swords and treasures are far worse than food. There was silence for a while. The skinny old man glanced at Ji Yulingyan and said slowly, "The name of the Yi family in Zhongzhou is like thunder." Although there were offenses before, the culprit was the old and unscrupulous son. Since he has already been punished, why should he continue to persecute him? My sword sect is indeed not as big as your Yi family in Zhongzhou, but it can stand in the eastern wilderness for tens of thousands of years, but it is not something that can be manipulated by others. Boom. As soon as he finished speaking, a majestic sword intent spread out from his body and swept through the sword sect. In an instant, the long swords carried by countless disciples or held in their hands lost control at this moment, and they all rushed into the air. Thousands of swords flew together, converging into a long sword river, flowing in the void. Li Mubai tightly held the trembling ancient sword in his hand, his expression gloomy. This is the power of semi-saint. If you want to become a martial saint, you must understand a certain law. Semi-saint, on the other hand, has just begun to come into contact with the edge of the law, and has been able to briefly control a weak power of the law. Just this weak trace has the power to crush Martial Venerable. This skinny old man is Ji Yulingyan's grandfather. A real old guy. He has been in seclusion in the sword world, and now his cultivation has reached the level of semi-saint. As a member of the sword sect, he naturally cultivates swordsmanship, so within the scope of the sword sect, his combat power can be maximized. Strange. Uncle Zhang's expression remained unchanged, but his heart was full of surprise and uncertainty. Both of them are semi-saint cultivators, so he should not be afraid of the skinny old man. But he didn't know if it was an illusion, but he always felt that the old man's aura carried a scary and sharp sword intent, which made him smell a faint sense of crisis. This aura should never belong to a semi-saint. Can be biased. This skinny old man is indeed a semi-saint, which is far different from a martial saint. Something weird. Uncle Zhang felt awe-inspiring and secretly sent a message to Yi Qingluan, asking her to be extra careful. Yi Qingluan frowned slightly. She bent down and whispered in Zhang Han's ear, "Master, be careful, something seems wrong with this old man. Uncle Zhang just reminded me to be ready to leave at any time." A strange color flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. Since Uncle Zhang reminded him like this, it meant that he was not sure of defeating the other party. This is where things get interesting. Both are semi-saints, and Zhang Bo practices the rare and powerful way of space. He should not be afraid, so why is there any fear? Thinking in his mind, Zhang Han stared at the skinny old man and muttered in his heart. Detecting. Testing completed. Ji Yu Tianya, semi-saint, understands a bit of the artistic conception of a mortal execution sword formation in the sword world, and can imitate the layout, and has a vicious mind doing everything to the extreme. Nothing in return. Closing square bracket. Now, Zhang Han has already figured out how to use the system. If you do not have any extra thoughts during the test, then there will be no reward. If you add one more thought, there will be a corresponding reward. A mortal execution sword formation. Zhang Han's eyelids drooped slightly to hide the shock in his eyes. The 10 peaks of sword sect are transformed from the fragments of the immortal executing sword. Could it be that the sword world was not created by the founder of the sword sect, but was related to the Zushan formation? Think of this. Zhang Han's heart felt hot. That is the immortal execution sword formation. Once it is arranged, 4 people with the same cultivation level are required to break it. Certainly, this refers to the full version of immortal execution sword formation. No wonder Uncle Zhang sensed the danger to this skinny old man. It turned out that Ji Tianya was able to imitate and arrange a shoddy version of the immortal execution sword formation. Although the power was greatly reduced, it was still enough to deal with Uncle Zhang at the same level. Sword World, I must go there, Zhang Han said to himself. At this time, the skinny old man Ji Tianya suddenly showed a hint of surprise and looked at Zhang Yi not far away, who was carrying a long sword on his back. Even Li Mubai could barely control his sword from being drawn away, but that was just a young girl, and she was not affected at all. After looking at it twice, his eyes lit up. Innocent sword body. I didn't expect that this old man would actually be able to see the nature of this legendary sword Dao body in his lifetime. Mubai, why didn't you report this to the sword world and make us old guys happy? He looked at Zhang Yi with a hint of hidden greed. It was like discovering some treasure. The supreme elders are peacefully retreating in the sword realm. Naturally, I don't want to disturb you. Li Mubai said calmly, without any respect for the skinny old man in his words. This is your fault. Ji Tianya looked solemn and said in a deep voice. How important is Wugu's sword body? You should tell the sword world as soon as possible and let her enter the sword world to practice, so that her peerless physique will not be stained. Let's do this. When this matter is over, I will take her into the world. Sword realm. Li Mubai frowned and fell into deep thought. What does this old guy want to do? A trace of doubt flashed in Zhang Han's mind. Judging from his introduction, he is a man with a vicious mind. He is definitely not a kind person. How could he be so kind? After thinking about it, he muttered in his mind. If you agree to his request, Ji Tianya, semi-saint, has understood a bit of the artistic conception of immortal execution sword formation in the sword world, and can imitate it. He has a vicious mind and does everything to the extreme. Let him bring Zhang Yi into the sword world, and he will get rewards. Zhang Yi will be taken away from his body and his soul will be scattered. Brush. Zhang Han's face suddenly darkened, a cold light flashed in his eyes, and he said coldly, You old immortal, I'm afraid that if she follows you into the sword world, she will no longer be her when she comes out again. Kindness. The skinny old man's face changed slightly, and his inner thoughts were revealed. A hint of coldness flashed in his eyes. He glanced at Zhang Han, then at Yi Qingluan who was standing behind him, squinted and said, I wonder if this young master is. Grandpa, his name is Zhang Han, and he is Miss Yi's master. Ji Lingyan also gained some confidence at this time and said in a low voice, he is also the brother of Wugo's sword body. Everything that happened today was because of his involvement. Master, the skinny old man Ji Tianya was stunned. He looked at Zhang Han with surprise and uncertainty. No matter how he looked at him, he was just a monk in the martial soul realm. Will the eldest daughter of the Yi family in Zhongzhou worship a martial spirit as her master? Is he a martial saint, so I can't see it? Ji Tianya thought to himself. Ji Lingyan observed the words and expressions and said, Grandpa, his cultivation is martial arts. He joined the sect some time ago and was appointed as the master of the 9th peak by Li Mubai. I just don't know. Why Miss Yi would worship him as her teacher. Hear the words. Ji Tianya's eyes flashed. He looked at Yi Qingluan, with a gentle smile on his face, and said, It turns out that the flood washed away the Dragon King Temple, and one family did not recognize the other. Miss Yi, so you are also a disciple of my sword sect? Quote. No, Yi Qingluan said calmly, I am just master's disciple. Ji Tianya's smile froze. His eyes fell on Zhang Han again, and he said with a smile. Zhang Han, since you are the peak master of the 9th peak, you can also be regarded as the heir and younger disciple of Lao Chan. How about giving Lao Chan a hard time and letting this matter go for today? In the sky, countless long swords turned into huge waves and torrents, hovering over the 9th peak, and from time to time they made a clear sound of swords. They gathered together, and they were quite imposing. Ji Tianya seemed to have completely forgotten what Zhang Han had just called him an old man. How could he not realize that among the people present, the one who can really make the decision is Zhang Han, the one with the lowest cultivation level? The reason is simple. That semi-saint is Yi Qingluan's guard in Zhongzhou, so he will naturally listen to her. And Yi Qingluan clearly takes Zhang Han as the main character. Aside, Li Mubai lowered his eyelids and explained calmly, he is the first 3 peak masters before you. Sigh. Zhang Han suddenly sighed. What's the shame? Ji Yu Tianya looked at him with a smile. It's a shame that I always thought that the 9th peak was aloof from other things. I didn't expect that a scumbag once served as the peak leader. It's really sad and sad. Zhang Han shook his head, his face full of waning spirits. Ji Yu Tianya's wrinkled face twitched violently. His smile gradually faded, and he stared at Zhang Han coldly. It seems that you are not willing to let it go. Zhang Han smiled. He opened his mouth and spoke 2 words clearly. I don't want to. Ji Yu Tianya glanced at Yi Qingluan, then looked at Uncle Zhang, and said slowly. Fellow Taoist, Jian Zong has no intention of being an enemy of the Yi family. If fellow Taoist and Miss Yi leave like this, I will not be embarrassed in the slightest. When this matter is over, I will personally bring a big gift to apologize, to ask for forgiveness for the poor reception. Pass. Hear this. Uncle Zhang looked at Yi Qingluan with hesitation on his face. If he were just a person, although he would be wary, he would not throw a wrench into it, but if the young lady was put in danger, he would definitely be responsible for her death. No need. Yi Qingluan's face was calm and his eyes were unwavering. What's not good for master is like what's bad for me, Yi Qingluan. Either we leave together today, or we all stay here together. Miss. Uncle Zhang's expression changed slightly. Yi Qingluan raised a hand, indicating that he didn't need to say any more. This made the skinny old man Ji Yu Tianya also hesitate. Although he had a trump card and was confident that he could keep them, but the important thing is to offend the Yi family of Zhongzhou to death. I don't dare to give him the courage. Zhang Han took a deep look at Yi Qingluan. He finally believed that Yi Qingluan truly worshipped him as his teacher, rather than plotting the immaculate sword body or something else. He pondered for a long time. Ji Yu Tianya was about to agree. Suddenly, Ji Yu Lingyan showed a hint of anxiety and quickly sent a message to him. Grandpa, they can leave, but Nangong Wan must not leave. This is related to breaking through the secret of Martial Saint. We must have her. Ji Yu Tianya's heart moved. He pointed at Nangong Wan and said in a deep voice, I can let you all leave Zhanzong, and there will be no more difficulties from now on, but she must stay. Can't. Li Mubai's expression suddenly changed. Even if you don't have to think about it, you know that if you let Nangong Wan stay here, something bad will happen. Shut up. Ji Yu Tianya glanced at him with cold eyes, and the terrifying pressure was suddenly released, making Li Mubai freeze on the spot, unable to move at all. Immediately, he looked at Zhang Han and sneered, Death or life, the choice is yours. Kai. In the sky, the long river torrent formed by countless long swords suddenly spread out and became 4 equal parts, and then condensed into a huge long sword, which was arranged in all directions of the 9th peak. At the same time, countless sword chi crisscrossed each other, condensing into complex lines and turning into a vague array in the sky. Not good. Uncle Zhang's expression changed slightly. He finally knew the source of his uneasiness. This old guy had secretly started to arrange the sword formation before, but he couldn't tell it. By the time he saw it, it was already too late to stop him. Rest assured. Ji Yu Tianya glanced at him and said calmly, I won't hurt your young lady. Is this the immortal execution sword formation? Zhang Han looked at the 4 giant swords condensed from countless long swords and the vague formation diagram in the air with great interest. After thinking for a while, he muttered silently, how to break the formation. Brush. Words instantly came to mind. The 4 ultimate sword formation is a shoddy version of the sword formation created by everyone in the sword world using the immortal execution sword formation as a template and working together to understand it. It is made up of thousands of swords and is very powerful. If Zhang Yi inserts the Ice Soul sword into the center of the 9th peak, and then communicates with Wanjian with the talent of the Wugo sword body, he will get a reward. Zhang Yi can control the sword formation. Closing square bracket dot. Zhang Han's expression suddenly became very strange. The so-called 4 ultimate sword formation can only be said to be a shoddy version of the shoddy version. Presumably the elders of the sword sect did not know its original name, so they gave it such a name. Interestingly, this sword formation can be broken so easily by Wu Guo's sword body. No, it's not just as simple as breaking it, but directly turning against the guest, replacing Gu Tianya's position, and becoming the controller of the four ultimate sword formation. Have you thought it through? Gu Tianya spoke coldly, his eyes serious. At this time, a hint of evil flashed in Yi Qingluan's bright eyes, and he whispered softly, Master, you don't need to be threatened by him. The disciple can inform the family now and ask them to send people to bulldoze the sword sect to the ground. Her tone was calm, but her words were extremely cruel. It seems like a natural thing. No need. Zhang Han shook his head slightly. He doesn't want to get too involved with Yi Qingluan's family now. After all, his cultivation level is indeed not high enough, making people suspicious, and he has caused a lot of trouble for nothing. Hear the words. Yi Qingluan said no more. She just made a suggestion. If Zhang Han didn't adopt it, it meant that he had his own way to get through this difficulty. She believed in the Emperor Master unconditionally. It was like being reborn and worshipping him as his teacher without hesitation. Perhaps, in the eyes of the Imperial Master, this is not a difficulty at all, right? Think it through. Zhang Han glanced at Gu Tianya with a half-smile, and waved to Zhang Yi, who was quietly watching a show, not far away. Yi, come here. Whoosh! Zhang Yi grabbed the little pung bird, jumped down from the branch of the world tree, and ran to Zhang Han in the blink of an eye. She was very smart and knew that in this situation, calling her over must have something important to say, so she remained silent, raised her little head, and waited seriously for Zhang Han to speak. Did you see that position? Zhang Han grabbed the wine glass and flicked it, and the wine inside flew out, condensed into a water sword in the air, and was inserted into a certain position with a pop. Yeah, I saw it. Zhang Yi nodded seriously. Go, insert your ice soul sword there, and then, Zhang Han said with a faint smile on his lips, carefully communicate with those swords in the sky, do you understand? Understood. Zhang Yi ran over with a whoosh, and simply inserted the ice soul sword at the position indicated by Zhang Han. Then, she closed her eyes and began to concentrate on communicating with the sword in the air. Everything in the world has spirit. The same goes for swords. The so-called spirit does not necessarily refer to the spirit of the sword, but the spirit carried by the sword itself. The Wugo sword body can communicate with the spirit of the sword anytime and anywhere. Gu Tianya looked at this scene, but didn't care. In his mind, although the Wugo sword body is said to be heaven-defying, as long as it has not grown up, it is not something to be afraid of. Therefore, he didn't take Zhang Yi's actions into consideration at all. This is mainly related to the world's understanding of the Wugo sword body. In history, the Wugo sword body has appeared too few times, and the most recent time was 10,000 years ago. Most people just think that Wugo sword body is just naturally close to the sword, but they don't know much about other aspects. And the method to identify the Wugo sword body is very simple. At a glance, the elemental auras around them all keep a respectful distance from the Wugo sword body. This is the most basic characteristic. The second is to be close to the sword, or in other words, the sword is close to her. With just two simple points, one can directly identify the Wugo sword body. Have you thought clearly? Gu Tianya spoke coldly again. If it were normal times, he would have killed him directly, but now that the Yi family in Zhongzhou was involved, he had to be more cautious and try not to do anything if he could, otherwise there might be some trouble. No hurries. Zhang Han glanced at him and said, such an important matter requires careful thinking. How about we ask the parties involved for their opinions? Said. Zhang Han looked at Nangong Wan's primordial spirit with a smile. What do you think? She wanted to say, if possible, I certainly don't want to stay here and let people prey on me. But after a few seconds of silence, she smiled bitterly, shook her head and said, you go. As long as I keep the secret, they still need me and can't do anything to me. Gu Tianya snorted coldly and sneered at her words. Zhang Han glanced in the direction of Zhang Yi and saw that her eyes were still closed, so he followed the words and said, aren't you afraid of being searched for your soul? Not afraid. Nangong Wan looked down on life and death and said calmly, I have planted a restriction in the primordial spirit. Once someone searches for the soul, my primordial spirit will directly collapse and dissipate, and they will not get anything. Hearing this, Gu Tianya and Ji Yulinyan's expressions became ugly. Prescient. Zhang Han laughed and gave a thumbs up. Beside, Li Mubai's eyes were red, but he couldn't move at all. He could only watch helplessly. Also imprisoned in place was Thunder Sword, Lei Qianqi. He also had red eyes, with lightning flashing in his pupils. Give you 10 more seconds. For some reason, Ji Tianya suddenly felt an uncomfortable feeling, as if he continued to delay, something very bad would happen. His eyes were sinister and he said solemnly, after 10 seconds, I will take it as your default that you will not hand over Nangong Wan. Then don't blame me for being rude. Zhang Han glanced at Zhang Yi. At this time, she had opened her bright eyes and blinked at herself with a smile. Success. A smile flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. Don't think about it. Say it. Ji Tianya seemed to have guessed what Zhang Han would say next. His eyes narrowed, and a terrifying and cold aura slowly emanated from his body. His sunken eyes stared at Zhang Han like poisonous snakes that prey on others. My choice is. The smile on Zhang Han's face faded inch by inch, and finally became expressionless. I'll send you back to the west. Okay, okay, okay. Ji Tianya said 3 good words in a row. He sneered, his snake-like eyes full of cruelty. In this case, I can only send you to the underworld to occupy a seat first. You two, where are you? He looked at Yi Qingluan and Uncle Zhang coldly. Why? Uncle Zhang looked at Yi Qingluan, who had a calm expression, sighed, took a step forward, shook his head and said, that's all, I'm here to give it a try today. Is your sword formation more powerful or ice space method better? Boom. Not far away. The world tree rises from the ground and turns into a beautiful shadow shrouded in hazy blue, and its face cannot be seen clearly. Rot. She walked step by step, and behind her appeared giant trees that reached the sky. The vast, ancient yet vital aura swept across the entire 9th peak in an instant, reviving a dozen plants and trees that were about to wither. Demon plant. Ji Tianya glanced at her indifferently, but did not take it into his eyes at all. I have noticed you for a long time. How dare a demon plant from the venerable realm world dare to come out and jump around? Boom. His breath was crushed away, trying to keep an eye on him. However, World Tree only paused for a moment, and then slowly took steps again, light and steady. Ha! Ji Tianya looked at her in surprise, his eyes brightening. It's interesting, could it be that you are a mutant? Surrender to me, I won't kill you, and I can give you some pointers in the future to help you reach a higher level. It's just semi-saint. The light and sweet voice echoed on the 9th peak, and World Tree returned his words, you alone are worthy of giving me advice. Ji Tianya's face suddenly darkened. If that's the case, then go die. He flicked his fingers, and the 2 sword lights turned into huge scissors, cutting towards the waist of the World Tree. Have you forgotten me? Uncle Zhang's figure appeared out of thin air in front of the World Tree. He raised his hand and pressed it, and the huge scissors suddenly became extremely slow in the air and were sent into Kong Kong Lele's space. The way of space is really interesting. Ji Tianya squinted his eyes, looking at the sword light that was almost stagnant in the air, and narrowed his eyes. In normal times, I might still have a good fight with you, but now. I'm sorry. 4 ultimate sword formations, rise. He slowly stretched out his hand and pointed towards the sky, with a confident smile on his face. Don't worry, I won't kill you. After all, you are a member of the Yi family in Zhongzhou, but it is inevitable to suffer some pain. Uncle Zhang's face was solemn, staring at the sword formation in the air, and surrounding the empty room with his hands. Not far away, Yao Yao walked to Zhang Han's side, and the huge shadow of the World Tree behind her stretched its branches and leaves, as if it wanted to penetrate the sky. She also stared at the 4 ultimate sword formation and was ready. A few seconds later, there was silence between heaven and earth. There was no movement in the 4 ultimate sword formation and it was still hovering in the sky. Ji Tianya was stunned for a moment. He quickly made another seal with his right hand and shouted loudly at the same time. 4 ultimate sword formations, rise. A long while. Still no movement at all. ... The formation failed. Uncle Zhang's eyes as he looked at Ji Tianya gradually became dangerous, and there was a hint of ridicule in the corner of his mouth. What a powerful sword formation, I have learned from it. I dare to ask fellow Taoist, this sword formation, could it be used to scare people to death? Cold sweat broke out on Ji Tianya's forehead. He made a seal with both hands, looked up to the sky and roared, 4 absolute sword formations. At this moment, a clear and sweet voice mixed with childishness suddenly floated not far away. 4 ultimate sword formation, rise. Base. Countless swords made clear sword sounds in unison, seemingly in response. In the sky, the blurry formation gradually became clearly visible. 4 giant swords condensed from countless long swords shot out dazzling swords at the same time and landed in the center of the formation. The 4 sword flowers gathered together and turned into a thick sword energy light pillar, which suddenly fell to the ground, covering Zhang Yi, who was standing in the center of the 9th peak, Long Dian included. The 4 ultimate sword formation activates justice. Countless sword energy crisscrossed, forming a huge and clear formation in the sky, covered with rune marks. It rotated slowly, with a long pillar of sword light hanging from the center, connecting the 4 giant swords in the southeast, northwest and northwest. The pure white dress was swaying, and Zhang Yi stood in the beam of light, like a divine maiden falling from the sky, divine and flawless. All eyes were on her. Uncle Zhang opened his mouth wide and his eyes almost popped out. Turn out to be. It's not that the 4 ultimate sword formation was not successfully deployed, it was that it was successfully deployed, but the little girl took control of it. Looking at this scene, a complex light flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes. The stainless sword body is known as one of the strongest physiques in all time. A body born with a shortcut. Although this physique is only close to kendo, it is enough. Although the sword is not within the scope of the innate law, and is not as incredible as the laws of space, time, cause and effect, etc., but among the acquired laws, it is undoubtedly the strongest attack. The Great Tao is 3000, just take 1 gourd and drink it. That's enough. Although Yi Qingluan was defeated by the blood-clothed Empress, 703, with 1 sword, there was no resentment at all. The gap in strength was there and insurmountable. However, she thought she had overestimated the Wugo sword body, but she still did not expect that this body could be so terrifying. In the hands of a semi-saint, she could forcefully take away the control of the sword array. It's really unbelievable. Wrong. As he was thinking about it, what happened just now suddenly appeared in Yi Qingluan's mind. Obviously, Zhang Yi listened to Zhang Han's words before running to that location and inserting the ice soul sword in the center of the peak. After a while, she took control. That is to say, if you want to seize control of the 4 ultimate sword formation, just having the Wugo sword body is not enough. You must find the key points. In the final analysis, the Emperor's vision is too vicious. Yi Qingluan said silently in his heart. Otherwise, what use would the Wuzuo sword body have? In fact, she has always suspected that the Emperor's master is probably the reincarnation of a certain ancient power. Otherwise, how could he be able to understand everything at a young age, as if there is nothing in the world that he does not understand? Only in this way can the group room be connected. This is impossible. Ji Yutianya stared blankly at Zhang Yi, who was shrouded in the long pillar of sword light. But soon, the dullness in his eyes was replaced by greed, and he looked at Zhang Yi with a strong look of covetousness. Good. What a wonderful Wusho sword body. He showed his white teeth, and his smile was ferocious and cold. I don't believe that in the realm of martial arts, you can completely control this 4 ultimate sword formation arranged by me. No matter how strong the Wugo sword body is, it will not be able to defy the heavens. The wrath of Thunder God. Stab. Electric arcs exploded all over Ji Yutianya. He is Lei Qianqi's master, and the skills he practices are naturally related to the thunder method. Rolling dark clouds filled the sky in an instant, and the sun's brilliance was obscured. Countless electric arcs fell from the sky, condensing crazily in the void to outline an extremely huge figure. The figure's entire body was composed of thunderclouds and lightning, carrying a violent aura that destroyed everything. Boom! Thunder roared, and the huge figure held a thunder sword as big as the 9th peak. He slowly lowered his head, and his giant eyes were filled with blazing white light, like 2 blazing suns across the sky. Ji Yutianya slowly rose into the sky, looking down indifferently. With your cultivation level, I'm afraid you can only maintain the sword formation, but you won't be able to unleash its power, right? How long can you hold on? A quarter of an hour, or half a quarter of an hour? No matter how bad I am, I can still handle it in just a quarter of an hour. By then, it will be your death. Uncle Zhang's eyes were serious. A semi-saint that no one can despise. He took a step forward, stretched out his hand and pressed it in the air, and said solemnly, "Fold the void." There were ripples in the air like water waves. The layers of space were folded, and the huge thunder and lightning phantom was slightly dissipated, but it was instantly replaced by thunderclouds all over the sky, and it was not affected at all. "Fellow Taoist, your void folding technique is useless against me," Gu Tianya said calmly. He had always been wary of Uncle Zhang in his heart and did not want to offend him too much. "Let's use better methods. Call out." A green branch rose into the sky, like a divine spear, piercing his eyebrows like lightning. "Ignorance." Gu Tianya looked at Yao Yao below and sneered again and again. "Even if you are born with a different species and become a monster, you will still not be able to cultivate to the martial venerable level. What's more, the thunder path I have cultivated can defeat all monsters in the world." He didn't care at all, and casually flicked his fingers on the green branches close at hand. When the sound of gold and iron clashing exploded, Gu Tianya's complexion changed slightly, and his figure was so shocked that he took a step back. "How come?" He looked down at his finger in surprise, and there was a small wound on it, bleeding out. In the blow just now, the green branch actually hurt FTE. Uncle Zhang also looked at Yao Yao in surprise. He didn't take this 10,000-year-old tree demon in his eyes at first. After all, the cultivation level was there, but the result was beyond his expectation. This demon plant in the venerable realm world can actually compete with semi-saint head-on. Phew, phew, phew. Countless green branches stretched across the sky, like thousands of divine spears firing together, overwhelming the sky and the earth. Gu Tianya's scalp suddenly became numb. He didn't dare to push it any further. An ancient sword with flashing lightning appeared in his hand and he squeezed it hard. The thunder is rolling, and the lightning is like a snake. The huge lightning figure was exactly the same as his movements, waving a huge thunder sword about the same size as the ninth peak, slashing at the countless green branches with a deafening roar. Stab! Thunder and lightning overflowed. The green branches quickly retracted, and the sun was scorched black. The green halo shrouding Tang Tiantian's body was flickering, and he was obviously damaged. Gu Tianya is right, the world tree is a demon plant after all, and there is no monster that is not afraid of thunder and lightning. This is an innate natural suppression, not to mention the tree becoming a demon. Coupled with the difference in realm between the two, Tang Tiantian was at a disadvantage after all. At this time, Uncle Zhang took a deep breath, pressed the air, and shouted in a low voice. "Void Mahamudra." Boom! An invisible giant palm compressed the air and appeared in front of Gu Tianya without any warning. Before he could react, he was slapped hard on his body, as if he had been hit by a giant hammer. Puff! Gu Tianya flew backwards, coughing up blood from his mouth. His face turned pale, and a hint of surprise flashed in his eyes. The space is really hard to guard against. However, I am not without ways to deal with it. The next moment, his body swayed slightly, and in the blink of an eye he got into the body of the huge thunderous figure, standing at the heart. The rolling thundercloud enveloped him, forming a natural defense. "Fellow Taoist, I sincerely have no intention of quarreling with you. Why do I have to make such an unpleasant fuss over a small martial spirit?" Gu Tianya's voice was like thunder, echoing in the sky. Seeing this, Uncle Zhang frowned. If it weren't for this thunderous figure, he would have absolute confidence that he could suppress the opponent. However, blocked by the endless thunderclouds, his way of space has not yet reached home. He is unable to penetrate the layers of thunderclouds and hit Gu Tianya hiding inside, so he can only be forcibly delayed for time. After thinking for a while, Uncle Zhang lowered his figure and said to Yi Qingluan, "Miss, how about we leave first? This combat technique draws out the thunder, which is indeed powerful, but it should last for a long time, and it should not be too long. But if we continue to delay like this, and wait until Wu Quan's sword strength is exhausted, and let 1.1 regain control of the sword array, then we want to leave, I'm afraid, it won't be easy." Although he doesn't know how to break the thunder god's wrath, if he wants to leave, Gu Tianya can't stop him. Hearing this, Yi Qingluan nodded slightly. She lowered her eyes and looked at Zhang Han, who was sitting peacefully, and said softly, "Master, what do you think?" Uncle Zhang. He suddenly had the urge to touch his forehead and sigh. Think about how smart and independent your young lady was back then. Tell the truth. Now I don't know why, but I attach so much importance to Zhang Han's ideas. No matter what happens, I have to ask him first. That's called being obedient, as if he's been given ecstasy. Need not. Zhang Han chuckled lightly. He raised his head and stared at the huge lightning figure, with the corners of his lips slightly raised. Thunder God's Wrath, heavenly grade lower level combat skill, used by Gu Tianya, has 19 flaws in total. You stand at any flaw, apply a drop of World Tree Essence blood on the center of your eyebrows, and practice Scripture of Indestructibility. You will get rewards. Scripture of Indestructibility breaks through to the second level. Closing square bracket dot. The last chapter of the previous chapter was written incorrectly. It should be a drop of World Tree Essence blood, not the essence blood of the mythical beast. It has been revised. What does Master mean? Yi Qingluan's bright eyes were shining and he looked at Zhang Han curiously. No matter how she thought about it, she couldn't think of any way to solve this crisis except leaving Zhanzong. Certainly, she had no fear for her own safety. Even if Jianzong was given 10,000 courages, they would not dare to hurt him. This was the confidence of the Yi family. I need a favor from Uncle Zhang. Zhang Han pondered for a while, then turned to look at Uncle Zhang standing next to him. Sir, please tell me. Uncle Zhang nodded. This, Thunder God's Wrath, has a total of 19 flaws. Uncle Zhang, please send me to one of the flaws, 1 inch above the left eye of the thunderous figure. Zhang Han said slowly. Flaw. Uncle Zhang was stunned for a moment. He looked up at the thunderous figure that was even more towering than the mountain. How can we see the flaw in this? Sir, are you sure? Uncle Zhang frowned little by little and said in a deep voice, I can send you up there, but I can't guarantee your safety afterwards. It's filled with violent thunder and lightning. With your cultivation, I'm afraid. Send me up and forget about it. Zhang Han smiled and said, I have my own plan. This. Uncle Zhang looked at Yi Qingluan hesitantly. Yi Qingluan bit her red lip gently with her teeth, hesitated for a moment, and then breathed out softly, Uncle Zhang, follow Master's instructions. Master, you must pay attention to your own safety. Even though she retains 10,000 points of trust in the Imperial Master, it is a matter of life and death after all. Good. Uncle Zhang nodded heavily. This moment. There was a clear change in the way he looked at Zhang Han. If you dare to do this, you are either an idiot, or you have a certain degree of confidence. No matter how you look at Zhang Han, he doesn't look like an idiot, so he must have a plan. If this situation can really be overcome, then Yi Qingluan would be right to worship Zhang Han as his teacher. Easy. Uncle Zhang was too lazy to continue thinking. There is no reverse. If Zhang Han's plan fails, he will definitely die. He has no confidence that he can save him. Sister Yao Yao. Zhang Han turned his head and looked at the human form of World Tree. He coughed lightly and said, Can you give me a drop of your blood essence? Good. Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and nodded slightly. Brush. A branch flew out from behind her and suddenly exploded in the air, condensing into a drop of juice that shone with crystal green light. A rich aura of vitality suddenly filled the air, making people feel energetic. Thank you, Sister Tiantian. Zhang Han quickly took out the jade bottle and put the drop of blood essence into it. Think about it. He directly took out a small bottle of 10,000 years stone milk and said, Sister Yao Yao, this bottle of 10,000 years stone milk can restore your losses. Tang Yao Yao was not polite and simply accepted it. Losing a drop of blood essence is indeed a loss for her, but this bottle of 10,000 year stone milk can completely replenish it. To be precise, she won't use so much at all. On the side, Uncle Zhang looked surprised. The conditions for the formation of stone milk are very harsh, let alone 10,000 years of stone milk. Although this small bottle is not much, it is actually extremely valuable. Even if it were placed in Zhongzhou, countless people would rush to buy it. But Zhang Han easily took out a small bottle, which was really surprising. Could it be from the Emperor's tomb? Uncle Zhang thought to himself. He heard that Zhang Han was inherited in the Emperor's tomb, and that the 10,000-year-old tree demon named Tang Yao Yao also walked out of the Emperor's tomb. This made him overturn his previous guesses about Zhang Han, but it's even more puzzling. There is obviously no martial saint sitting behind Zhang Han. So, what charm does he have that can make a demon from the venerable realm world follow him? Uncle Zhang. At this time, Zhang Han's voice interrupted his thoughts. Send me up now. When the time comes for his Thunder God's wrath, it will be too late. Good. Uncle Zhang made a prompt decision. He pressed his rough hands on Zhang Han's shoulders, and spiral lines appeared in his eyes. In an instant, Zhang Han saw strange ripples in the air around him, and even his vision became distorted. The next moment, he suddenly felt a strong dizziness that passed instantly. At the same time, Uncle Zhang's faint voice sounded in his ears. I can forcefully send you in, but I can't take you out, because the thunderous aura blocks the connection between me and you. Just take care of yourself. Zhang Han's vision suddenly became clear. He found that the surroundings were filled with violent thunder auras, thunder clouds and purple arcs surging, filled with destructive power, giving him a faint feeling of paralysis all over his body. It seems to have reached above the left eye of the thunder figure. The way of space is really interesting. Zhang Han smacked his lips. He immediately took out the essence and blood of the world tree and applied it on his eyebrows. The rich power of life immediately enveloped his whole body, and the numbness disappeared. Only then did Zhang Han understand why he needed to use the essence and blood of the world tree. In this world, in terms of vitality, nothing can surpass the world tree, and the thunder path represents destruction, so the function of this drop of world tree blood is to protect his body. The flaw is where the Lei Dao aura is weakest. If it were a little stronger, the vitality released by the essence and blood of the world tree would not be enough to offset the power of destruction. At this time, Ji Tianya naturally discovered Zhang Han. He was stunned for a moment, a little confused. Could this be the legendary "throw yourself into a trap"? However, he quickly came to his senses and let out a deafening sneer. There is really no way to hell. You surrendered yourself. You really want to be the first to die. No matter what, I will make it happen for you. Stab. The violent thunder and lightning turned into winding and circling electric snakes, and they swam crazily towards Zhang Han at the same time, as if they wanted to devour him alive. Boom. Countless thick electric snakes hit Zhang Han's position, bursting out with dazzling electric light and stinging his eyes. Below, a trace of worry flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes, and he said softly, Uncle Zhang, is Master okay? It's okay for now. Uncle Zhang's eyes were a little strange. As a semi-saint, he can naturally sense that Zhang Han's aura is still there. No, it's not just there, it seems to be a little stronger than before, which is puzzling. Weird, Uncle Zhang murmured in his heart, is there really such a flaw that allows him to stay there without any harm? He saw it clearly just now. The electric snakes all exploded where Zhang Han was. Even he did not dare to resist with his body due to their power. He could only use combat skills to offset or dodge each other. At this time, Zhang Han is sitting cross-legged, running scripture of indestructibility, with faint arcs of lightning surrounding his body. The electric snakes indeed exploded at him. However, most of the explosive power dissipated to the side in an instant, and only a subtle and pure trace of lightning power fell on him, which was eliminated by the rich vitality released by the essence and blood of the world tree. This is the flaw. This flaw can not only break the Thunder God's wrath, but it is also the weakest point in the thunder and lightning aura. When all the thunder and lightning reach this position, they will instantly scatter in other directions. Zhang Han didn't know the reason, but it was either related to Ji Tianya's inability to practice well, or it was due to the combat skill itself. After all, nothing in the world can be truly perfect. As long as it exists, there will be flaws. This is impossible. Ji Tianya's eyes suddenly widened. Under an attack of this level, a monk in the martial soul realm has no chance of surviving. He will definitely become nothing more than a dregs and be completely destroyed. He waved his hand violently, and the snake, which was several times thicker than before, snaked around Zhang Han again. Boom! The thunder was rolling and the light was extremely blazing, like a scorching sun across the sky. However, when the light disappeared, Zhang Han's figure reappeared. He was still sitting cross-legged, with a trace of arc flowing on his body, and his aura became stronger again. Ji Tianya suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. Could it be that he misjudged that this Zhang Han is not a martial spirit, but a hidden martial saint? No, wrong. If it was martial saint, he would have been slapped to death. Ji Tianya glanced in the direction of Zhang Yi. She was not exhausted yet and still maintained the sword formation. This made him secretly surprised, and at the same time, the greed in her eyes became even stronger. I don't believe that a small martial spirit like yours can be so powerful. A crazy and ferocious look appeared on his face. Boom! He suddenly became violent and committed suicide against Zhang Han himself. Semi-Saint was so fast that he rushed forward in just a blink of an eye. His eyes were cold and he was about to reach out and slap Zhang Han to death when his heart suddenly shook and his palm stopped abruptly. Can't take action. A heavy cold sweat broke out on Ji Tianya's forehead. As long as this palm is struck, the Thunder God's anger will instantly come back to me, and I will definitely suffer unimaginable damage. Why is this happening? Ji Tianya clearly felt that as long as this palm was shot, the Thunder God's wrath he unleashed would instantly come back to him. Such power would be absolutely unbearable. To be precise, he couldn't even step into the position where Zhang Han was. But, why? Ji Tianya thought hard. He has been practicing Thunder God's wrath for decades, and this is the first time he discovered that the Thunder God incarnation he cultivated actually has such a fatal flaw. And it was a strange flaw that he couldn't understand at all. Zhang Han. After a moment of silence, Ji Tianya's eyes flashed and he suddenly said, "How did you discover this flaw?" Zhang Han sat cross-legged and circulated scripture of indestructibility. His body is being continuously tempered by the power of thunder and lightning, and arcs are moving through the meridians in his body. In this process, the aura of destruction carried by the thunder and lightning caused his blood to wither, but in just a moment, it was replenished by the rich vitality released by the essence and blood of the world tree. Tell me and I can let you leave safely. Ji Tianya squinted his eyes, and a cold light flashed through his eyes. Otherwise, when Wu Guo's sword is exhausted, why would I still need the Thunder God's wrath? I can crush you to ashes with a snap of my fingers. Zhang Han still turned a deaf ear. His scripture of indestructibility is about to break through to the second level. The practice method given by the system is indeed the best way to improve. How can half the effort be twice as good? It is simply 100 times more effective. Change to normal times. Let him slowly practice scripture of indestructibility. I don't know how long it will take before he can step into the second level. But now, it only takes a few minutes. Aside, Ji Tianya's aura became more and more violent, and he felt extremely anxious. The length of time that Wu Guo's sword body could last was beyond his expectation, and now Zhang Han was using his Thunder God's wrath to practice. However, he did not dare to disperse the Thunder God's wrath now. The semi-saint from the Yi family in Zhongzhou and the weird martial venerable plant are still looking at it with eager eyes. Therefore, he could only watch helplessly as Zhang Han borrowed his power to practice, and was so angry that he wanted to vomit blood. What made him even more uncomfortable was that he couldn't touch the other person, otherwise he would be injured. One can imagine how frustrated he felt at the moment. The ninth peak. Weird. Uncle Zhang had a puzzled look on his face. Ji Tianya and Zhang Han are very close at hand, and they can easily reach each other with their bare hands, but why do they act like they are throwing a trap at them, wanting to take action but not daring to do so? Because he's worried about backlash. A flash of light flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes, and he said with admiration in his tone, "Master is really a strange person. His position may seem ordinary, but in fact he is in the most sensitive place. Either it's an inherent error in the technique, or it's a problem with Ji Tianya's own practice. No combat skill in the world is created out of thin air. Whether you are creating a combat skill or practicing a combat skill, you must arrange the Tao structure according to certain rules. As the saying goes, a single move affects the whole body. And the position where master is at this time should be where the basic pattern structure of the combat skill, Thunder God's wrath, is the most fragile, or, in other words, where fatal errors and omissions occur. Therefore, as a practitioner of combat skills, Ji Tianya, once he comes into contact there, the spiritual power in his body will instantly cause the rearrangement of the Tao pattern structure, causing extremely serious backlash. And he doesn't dare to put away Wrath of the God of Thunder at this moment. Otherwise, in the next second, you will bear the thunderous blows from Uncle Zhang and that senior Yao Yao, so we are in a stalemate, stuck between a rock and a hard place, watching the master borrow his power to practice. Yi Qingluan has a pleasant voice and talks eloquently. Next to them, Li Mubai and Lei Qianqi, who were no longer restrained, and Nangong Wan, who was in primordial spirit state, were thoughtful after hearing this. They have captured Ji Yu Lingyan. The latter's face was gray, she was devastated, and knew that she would not end well. Ms. Yi is very knowledgeable. Li Mubai couldn't help but praise. That's natural. Uncle Zhang had a smile on his face and looked at Yi Qingluan with admiration. My young lady was able to perfect the heavenly grade technique on her own when she was 10 years old. She is an eternal genius. Hear the words. Everyone looked at Yi Qingluan with even more different eyes. At the age of 10, you perfected the art of desserts. What an amazing talent. I think when they were 10 years old, they had to struggle to figure out even a Xuanpin Kung Fu. They needed a master to explain some of its meanings. Not to mention perfecting it, even practicing it was not easy. There is really no comparison between people. An eternal genius. Yi Qingluan slowly turned his head and stared at Zhang Yi, who was controlling the four ultimate sword formation not far away, feeling silent in his heart. If she is an eternal genius, then what is she? An eternal genius. It had been about a quarter of an hour since he had taken control of the four ultimate sword formation, but Zhang Yi didn't feel exhausted at all, and seemed quite relaxed. Although she was a martial emperor in her previous life and had an extremely ruthless vision, she still couldn't see why Zhang Yi could persist for so long. Certainly, one of the important reasons for this is that her knowledge is indeed still there, but after all, her physical body is still relatively weak. She has just stepped into the martial arts, so many things cannot be seen through with the naked eye. Not to mention, the path of cultivation she is taking now is completely different from her previous life. It was precisely in order not to be affected by the path of his previous life in this life and to hope to go further and higher that Yi Qingluan deliberately did not practice the combat skills he was proficient in his previous life. In the sky, purple arcs of electricity traveled around Zhang Han's body surface, and the aura on his body continued to get stronger. Although his cultivation remained unchanged due to the uniqueness of the martial soul realm, his physical body became stronger and stronger, and his blood was as strong as a head. The resurrected baby dragon. Ji Yu Tianya's face turned pale. A suffocating breath filled his chest, making him almost go crazy. Zhang Han could just borrow his power to practice. He was just a martial soul anyway and couldn't make any trouble. But the problem was that Zhang Yi on the 9th peak below was never exhausted. This is simply incredible. If he continues like this, he can no longer hold on to the Thunder God's wrath, and the spiritual power in his body is flowing away crazily. No, Ji Yu Tianya's eyes were ferocious. If the duration of the Thunder God's wrath is up and Wu Guo's sword body is still not exhausted, I'm afraid I will not be able to escape today. Those old guys are all watching the fun, and no one is willing to come out to help me. In the sword world, semi-saint still exists. They should have noticed such a big movement a long time ago, but from the beginning to the end, no one was willing to come out to help him. They were just watching his joke. Ji Yu Tianya was extremely angry, but there was nothing he could do. Everyone in the sword world is not united. They are not willing to offend the Yi family in Zhongzhou for their own sake. Fight. Ji Yu Tianya gritted his teeth. He stared at Zhang Han with cold eyes, murderous intent. Boom. The sound of thunder suddenly exploded. The clouds in the sky became thicker and thicker, making the world become gloomy. The brilliance of the sun was completely obscured. It was like a scene of doomsday, which made countless disciples of the sword sect tremble and hide on the peaks where they practiced. The peak masters of all major peaks also showed fear. The power of semi-saint is terrifying. Under such brilliant heavenly power, they are actually no different from ordinary disciples, they are all like ants. Ji Yu Tianya stared fiercely at Zhang Yi below and waved his hand fiercely. Stab. Dazzling lightning tore through the sky. The thunderous figure's eyes flashed with white light, staring at Zhang Yi. Then, he waved the huge thunder sword in his hand, causing thousands of thunders to fall, like a thunder sea waterfall, slowly falling towards the 9th peak. Sudden, thousands of swords roared together. 4 giant swords made of countless long swords vibrated, and fierce sword intent swept across the world. The sword light shot into the sky, piercing through the layers of thunder clouds, and falling down a wisp of Hexie's ray of sunshine. The long pillar of sword light connecting Zhang Yi and the formation diagram, Hao Wang Nuo, suddenly trembled slightly. Next moment, the vast array in the sky turned slightly. Kai. The long pillar of sword light seemed to have turned into a sword. The formation diagram was the hilt of the sword, and the long pillar of sword light was the body of the sword. As the formation diagram rotated, it slashed down towards the huge thunder sword. Boom! With just a touch, the thunder sword was instantly cut off by the sword light pillar, turning into lightning arcs scattered in all directions. Uncle Zhang and Tang Tiantian were stunned when they were about to make a move. What's happening here? Has the power of the four ultimate sword formation been activated? Yi Qingluan was startled, and then a look of shock flashed across her beautiful eyes, and the corners of her eyes twitched unnaturally. She murmured in a low voice, "It turns out that she can activate the power of the sword formation from the beginning to the end. Is the reason why you have been holding back and not speaking out because of Master's orders?" In the air, Ji Yutianya opened his mouth wide and his eyes popped out. He thought of countless possibilities, but he never thought that this Wushu sword body in the martial spirit realm could actually control the power of the four ultimate sword formation. How did you do that? He looked at Zhang Yi blankly. It's actually really easy. Zhang Han's plain voice suddenly sounded behind him. In the final analysis, you still underestimate the Wugo sword body. Ji Yutianya turned his head stiffly and said in a hoarse voice, looking down. Good. Zhang Han said calmly. Yi is an innocent sword body that can communicate with the spirits of 10,000 swords. They don't need Yi to actively drive them at all. Instead, they rely on the spiritual power you instilled into the sword formation to maintain them to autonomously at the same time. The formation diagram is also absorbing the spiritual energy between heaven and earth. Maybe nothing will happen if you attack others, but you attack her anyway, trying to cut off the connection between her and the four ultimate sword formation. As everyone knows, all swords have spirit. They took the initiative to explode the spiritual energy of heaven and earth absorbed by the array, activating the power of the sword array to protect Yi. The so-called self-inflicted suffering is nothing more than this. Hear the words. Ji Yutianya's face turned green and white. Suddenly, he coughed up a large mouthful of blood with a wow sound. He instantly became sluggish and extremely weak. In the sky, the huge thunder and lightning figure left a violent legacy. In the blink of an eye, it turned into pure thunder and lightning breath, escaped in all directions, got into the dark clouds above, and poured down with the rolling thunder. I see. Ji Yutianya laughed, as if he was crazy, but the light in his eyes was frighteningly bright. Wugo sword body, Wugo sword body. What a Wugo sword body. I was convinced. But as long as they capture you, they can't do anything to me. Tell me, if you are forced to use your life, will Wugo sword body be willing to trade itself for you? With a ferocious expression, he reached out and grabbed Zhang Han's arm. Brush. The long pillar of sword light swept across in an instant and passed by Ji Yutianya's neck. Ji Yutianya's figure suddenly stiffened. His withered palm stayed on Zhang Han's arm, motionless, and the ferocious sneer was frozen on his face. Forgot to say. Zhang Han looked at him and said calmly, although the previous blow was not the power of the sword array that Yi actively activated, it does not mean that she did not have the ability to activate it. Good means. Ji Yutianya spoke in a hoarse voice. The dazzling sword light lit up around his neck, and a thin, almost invisible line of blood slowly emerged. Bang! His body fell rapidly, as if it was extremely heavy, and hit the ground of Zhanzong with a loud bang. Looking down, a circular deep pit was vaguely visible. But the head is still suspended in the air. Excellent. Zhang Han looked at the head and said, it seems like you still have something to say. There was no blood dripping from Ji Yutianya's head. His face became calm and he said, I have lived my whole life, but I never thought that I would fall into the hands of two martial arts spirits. I don't ask you to forgive me for what I did before. I just ask you to forgive me for what I did before. One thing for you. Explain. Zhang Han said calmly, if you let me spare Ji Yulinyan's life, there is no need to say anything. Of course not. A cold sneer hung from the corner of Ji Yutianya's lips. If it weren't for the good granddaughter, I wouldn't have ended up like this. Although it was greed on my part, it was inseparable from her. She deserves to die. What I want to ask you is to let me leave a legacy, so that the inheritance I once received from the ancients will not be lost. Who do you want to leave it to? Zhang Han raised his eyebrows slightly. Wugo sword body. Gu Tianya said slowly, only the Wugo sword body can truly carry forward this inheritance. Zhang Han narrowed his eyes slightly. Even though a person is about to die, his words are good. However, he absolutely cannot trust this insidious old man. If you agree to his request, Gu Tianya, semi-saint, has understood a bit of the artistic conception of immortal execution sword formation in the sword world, and can imitate it. He has a vicious mind and does everything to the extreme. If you agree to let him give the inheritance to Wu Jiyu CHFD, sword body, you will get a reward. Zhang Yi's soul will be shattered. Closing square bracket. Really? A sneer appeared at the corner of Zhang Han's mouth. This old and immortal fool wants to rely on the primordial spirit that is about to be broken when he is about to die. Zhang Yi is really stubborn. But, like the thunder god's wrath just now, it would indeed be a pity if it was really lost. Zhang Han thought for a while, then suddenly something moved in his heart, and he muttered silently, if I let him pass on the ancient inheritance to me. Gu Tianya, semi-saint, has understood a bit of the artistic conception of immortal execution sword formation in the sword world, and can imitate it. He has a vicious mind and does everything to the extreme. If you let him pass on the inheritance to you, you will get a reward, the mysterious inheritance of the ancients. Closing square bracket. Feasible. Zhang Han's eyes flashed. The reason why he came up with this idea was naturally because scripture of indestructibility had just broken through to the second level. The scripture of indestructibility originally born from heaven and earth can only cultivate the flesh-refining body, but the scripture of indestructibility practiced by Zhang Han has been perfected by an ancient power. It can not only repair the physical body, but also the primordial spirit. After breaking through to the second level, both the physical body and the primordial spirit have been greatly improved, and there is no fear of the primordial spirit that is about to be broken in Gu Tianya. So what have you thought of? At this time, Gu Tianya spoke again with a sigh, I really don't want the inheritance to be cut off. It's such a pity. With the Yi family's semi-saint and the demonic plant by your side, are you still worried? Quote, taking retreat is an opportunity to advance as a good calculation. But, since Zhang Han has understood the old dog's thoughts, he will not be fooled. He calmly said, I can't trust you. You will pass the inheritance to me, and I will teach Yi. Gu Tianya fell silent. His eyes flickered slightly, and soon, he seemed to have made up his mind and said in a deep voice, okay. You are her brother, there is no difference between teaching you and teaching her. Put your hand on my head. Quote, I really can't wait. There was a mocking arc at the corner of Zhang Han's mouth, and he put his hand on the hanging head. The next moment, a cold light of successful conspiracy flashed in Gu Tianya's eyes, and the primordial spirit, which was about to be broken, separated from his head in an instant, followed Zhang Han's hand, and penetrated into his mind. In the sea of consciousness, the primordial spirit of Gu Tianya is extremely huge, but it is full of cracks, like a broken mirror that has been forcibly pieced together. He looked down at the insignificant Zhang Han primordial spirit with stern eyes, and sneered again and again. Boy, despite all your tricks, have you fallen into my hands? Do you really think I will pass on your inheritance to you? You are a young man, so naive and ridiculous. The butcher will accept this body of yours. Zhang Han raised his eyes, looked at the huge primordial spirit, and said calmly, a dog can't change its habit of eating shit. The power of words. Gu Tianya sneered and stared at him with serious eyes. Boy, do you have any last words? I am kind-hearted, maybe I can consider using your body to help you complete it. Have. Zhang Han nodded. Suddenly, his primordial spirit began to grow crazily, becoming huge at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, it reached the waist and abdomen of Gu Tianya's primordial spirit. In the blink of an eye, it was level with it. Gu Tianya stared at Zhang Han, who was getting taller and taller, with dull eyes. At this time, Zhang Han had become extremely huge. He looked down indifferently at Gu Tianya's primordial spirit, which was full of cracks. There was no emotion in his tone. Unfortunately, I didn't let you listen. Boom. He raised his foot and stepped down hard. Gu Tianya's face was filled with fear, and he opened his mouth to ask for mercy, but before he could make any sound, he was stepped on. Boom. The primordial spirit, full of cracks, exploded, completely shattered, leaving only a glowing circular light spot. Zhang Han reached out and grabbed it with a smile. Can it be detected in the sea of consciousness? He thought. The next second, the inheritance of the ancient thunder god is incomplete. Gu Tianya can only scratch its surface and has not understood its true meaning. After absorption, you can get rewards: inherited divine ability, thunder god body, supreme fighter. Thor's hammer, closing square bracket. 3. A flash of joy flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. This is actually the inheritance of the ancient thunder god. There is no thunder god's wrath that Gu Tianya used before. It must be a combat skill that he learned from this inheritance. If you guessed it correctly, it should be evolved from the inheritance divine ability. Thunder god body. Without any hesitation, Zhang Han simply absorbed the inheritance, and the information about Thor's body and Thor's hammer emerged in his mind. I see. Soon, he understood. The so-called thunder god body is actually a method of cultivating the flesh-refining body. The whole body is bathed in the power of thunder and lightning. It can also control lightning and punish the gods. After cultivating to the perfect state, it can also be directly transformed into the human body. However, it is extremely difficult to reach this level. If you do, it means that you have become the god of thunder. As for Thor's hammer, it was originally the law treasure of the ancient god of thunder. Although it is no longer known where it was lost, it can be visualized with thunder and lightning, because the lightning itself will be destructive, so it has extremely terrifying destructive power. A long while, Zhang Han suddenly sat down cross-legged in the void. At this time, the rain was still pouring. Dark clouds were pressing overhead, and streaks of lightning shot across the sky, as if they were about to tear the entire sky apart. Suddenly, arcs of electricity struck Zhang Han from all directions, enveloping him and erupting into a dazzling light ball that made it almost impossible to look straight at him. Below, everyone was shocked. Uncle Zhang. Yi Qingluan's pretty face changed color and she said urgently, "Go and save Master." No need to save. On the side, World Tree Tang Tiantian, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly said, "He should be absorbing the power of thunder and lightning. Not only is his breath not weak at all, but it is also slightly stronger." Good. Uncle Zhang's eyes were shining brightly, and he said quietly, "However, it's a bit strange. Just now he only dared to absorb a trace of thunder and lightning power at the flaw of thunder god's wrath, but now he directly attracts the thunder from the body tempering." Yi Qingluan was startled. She is also confused when she cares, and coupled with her lack of cultivation, she really didn't notice this just now. At this time, Zhang Yi walked over with small steps, her pure white skirt moving in the wind. She stood beside her, raising her little head and looking at Zhang Han in the sky. Yi Qingluan suddenly felt something in his heart. From beginning to end, Zhang Yi didn't seem to show any worry. After thinking about it, she asked softly, "Uncle Yi, aren't you worried about Master at all?" "Don't worry." Zhang Yi looked at her, blinked her bright eyes, and said in a very serious tone, "I believe nothing will happen to my brother." "Why?" Yi Qingluan asked curiously. "There's no reason." Zhang Yi pursed her lips, and there was a trace of inexplicable emotion in her big eyes. "Anyway, nothing will happen." Yi Qingluan was silent. She looked away, not quite understanding Zhang Yi's thoughts. Although Yi Qingluan is smart, he doesn't understand. If she didn't have Zhang Han, she would have the Yi family standing behind her and her family, but if Zhang Yi didn't have Zhang Han, she would have nothing. A long time, Zhang Han slowly opened his eyes and landed on the 9th peak from the air. "Master, are you okay?" Yi Qingluan stepped forward. She was only 16 years old now, in the period of growth, but she had already begun to show her beauty. She had a graceful figure, a slender waist, and walked like a weak willow supporting the wind. After awakening the Qingluan bloodline in his body, there was a hint of seductiveness between his eyebrows. "Fine." Zhang Han smiled and shook his head. At this time, he felt that the blood in his body was extremely abundant, and his body was as strong as a young wild dragon. Although his cultivation level had not increased, his foundation was sufficient. The strength of his body alone was enough to suppress the martial king and beat him violently. Scripture of indestructibility is truly the supreme scripture most suitable for human practice. Isn't it just fine? On the side, Uncle Zhang looked at Zhang Han with a look that was very different from before, with a hint of admiration. "Master Zhang is in the same realm, unless he meets some unparalleled genius, otherwise I'm afraid he will have no rivals. After all, he is a semi-saint. He can see at a glance how fierce Zhang Han's energy and blood are. Looking at it with his eyes, he can even see that Zhang Han's body is filled with bright thunder and golden light, like a god coming. Fan. At this moment, a figure slowly emerged from the void, silently, as if it didn't exist. However, Uncle Zhang's expression suddenly changed drastically, and there was a trace of fear in his eyes. He immediately stood in front of Yi Qingluan, and said nervously, "Miss, be ready to activate the command talisman given to you by the master of the family. Come here, man, is a saint. Martial saint." Zhang Han's pupils shrank slightly. He took a deep breath, stared at the ethereal figure in the sky, and calmly took out the bronze temple, shrank it to the size of a ring, and held it in the palm of his hand. Is it really necessary to release the corpse monster today? The person who came turned out to be a girl. Good. It's a girl. She was wearing a Taoist robe and looked like a fairy, but she was only about 6 years old, with a childish face and even a little baby fat. Only her eyes had a faint sense of vicissitudes of life. Both Zhang Bo and Tang Tiantian looked nervous. The gap between martial saint and semi-saint is huge, they are not on the same level at all. As a world tree, Tang Yaoyao can compete with semi-saint with martial venerable cultivation. However, in the eyes of martial saint she is no different from an ant and has no ability to fight back at all. Of course, Uncle Zhang is the same. At this moment, Li Mubai and Nangong Wan on the side suddenly showed surprise, and they both said almost at the same time, "Master." Old Sect Master. Lei Qianqi also saluted quickly. "Master." Zhang Han and others were stunned. The girl-looking martial saint in front of me is actually the previous generation head of the Sword Sect. The girl nodded slightly, her eyes swept across the two of them, and then fell on Zhang Yi, with a hint of surprise in her eyes. "Wugo sword body. Yi, please meet master soon." Li Mubai quickly winked at Zhang Yi. The disciples and grandsons pay their respects to the master. Zhang Yi looked at the girl who was smaller than herself and bowed somewhat uncomfortably. The girl looked at her again, nodded, and said, "The Wugo sword body is a rare sight in 10,000 years. If I remember correctly, the last time it appeared was 10,000 years ago. I didn't expect it to appear again in my sword sect now." Quote. Her eyes swept over everyone one by one, especially staying on World Tree, Yi Qingluan and Xiaoping for a moment, with deep meaning in her eyes. "Master, why did you come back suddenly?" Li Mubai asked doubtfully. When he first became the sect master, his master had already traveled around the world. Now, decades have passed, and his appearance has not changed at all, and he has even broken through to the saint realm. And he has become a white-haired old man. Just come back and take a look. The girl shook her head and did not elaborate. She glanced at the huge pit below the 9th peak and frowned. Jiyu Tianya is dead. What just happened? That's it. Li Mubai quickly told what happened before, exactly as it was. I see. After listening, the girl nodded thoughtfully and said calmly, "He is indeed worthy of his death." Then, what is she still doing? She stretched out her hand and pointed at Jiyu Lingyan, whose face was full of despair. Puff. Under the gaze of everyone, a cluster of flames rose up on Jiyu Lingyan's body, sweeping across her body in an instant. She even had time to scream before she turned into ashes. Zhang Tianlin, the guardian of Yi Qingluan, the legitimate daughter of the Yi family in Zhongzhou, has met the senior. Uncle Zhang saluted the girl with a respectful tone. "Zhongzhou Yi family." The girl showed a rare smile and said gently, "No wonder I said you looked familiar. It turns out you are the daughter of the Yi family. When you were born, I witnessed the vision of 100 birds paying homage to the phoenix, and sent you a congratulatory gift." Hear the words. Zhang Bo suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't expect that the martial saint of the sword sect would have such a connection with Yi Qingluan. In this case, I don't have to worry about any trouble. Yi Qingluan has met the senior. A strange color flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes. This is also a legendary figure. This is the first time she has seen it with her own eyes, but she has already heard about it. Her age is reversed. No one knows where she comes from. When she first appeared, she was gray-haired and very old. Then every year, her age decreased by 1 year. Today, she has become a 6-year-old child. Childlike appearance. No one knows why. No need to be polite. The girl chuckled softly. Finally, her eyes fell on Zhang Han, and she looked at him for a long time, then her eyes showed a trace of satisfaction and said, "Heroes come from young. You saved Wanner's life, I owe you a favor." "Senior, you're welcome." Zhang Han quietly put away the bronze temple. He had just checked the information of this martial saint, and her cultivation was not detectable, but he could know that she had no ill intentions towards him and others. "Let's go to the sword world." The girl's long sleeves flicked, and everyone's eyes suddenly blurred, and in the blink of an eye they were on the heavenly sword. Her face was calm, but her voice was filled with a touch of coldness. "I haven't been in the sect for a long time. Some people must have forgotten me, and they even dare to plot against my disciples. Wanner, stand beside me, I will seek justice for you." "Yes." Nangong Wan's primordial spirit is illusory and stands aside. The girl looked at her, pondered for a moment, then suddenly flicked her fingers, and a bead flew out from her fingers, floating above Nangong Wan, and fell down with clear rays of light surrounding it. After a while, Nangong Wan's primordial spirit has obviously become much more solid. Your primordial spirit is unstable. Either find a physical body as soon as possible, or switch to Ghost Dao. With a casual stroke of her hand, the girl opened a gap in the space. She stepped in and said, "Master will not stay in the sect for too long. You should make your choice as soon as possible. If it is the former, I will help you find a physical body. If it is the latter, I will give you the Riemann Dao technique." Quote. Hear the words. Nangong Wan showed a look of hesitation. The girl looked at her and said, "You don't have to choose right away. You still have a few days to think about it slowly. The two choices are completely different for your future." "Yes." Nangong Wan nodded respectfully. Zhang Han sighed with emotion after hearing this. This is the benefit of having an awesome master. At this time, he has followed the girl into the legendary sword world. I saw countless sword energy crisscrossing the sky, and everywhere was filled with strong sword intent. A tree was in the shape of a sword, a blade of grass was also in the shape of a sword, and even the stones on the ground were in the shape of a sword. Far in the sky, an extremely huge long sword stretched across the sky, with smoke and clouds lingering, and it was possible to vaguely see the palaces sitting on it. Wherever you look, there are swords everywhere. In the sword world, there are fierce sword intents everywhere. If your cultivation level does not reach a certain level, it will not only be useless in the sword world, but also harmful to the body. Li Mubai spoke in a low voice and introduced Zhang Han and others. Aside, Uncle Zhang's eyes were slightly solemn. He has seen many small worlds. Among the big families in Zhongzhou, which one does not have a small world? However, such a small world is unheard of. As everyone knows. In fact, the small world is not very different from the outside world. There are flowers, grass, artificial sun, day and night changes, and life can survive in it. In other words, the small world is a paradise. But the sword world of the sword sect is very different. All the things that appear here are in the form of swords, which shows that even the soil under your feet contains the terrifying sword intent, otherwise it would never be possible to reach this level. That is to say, except for the things that grow on this land, it is difficult for other creatures to survive here. As Li Mubai said, one must cultivate to a certain level. Otherwise, over time, the terrifying sword intent that is everywhere will invade the physical body and even the primordial spirit, and end up with the end of death. How can such a small world exist? Uncle Zhang muttered in his heart. The ancestor of the sword sect who opened up this sword world is a bit too scary. I don't know which ancient powerful existence it is. In short, it cannot be a nameless person. There was also surprise in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes. She had never been to sword sect in her previous life, so she naturally didn't know the existence of this sword world, so it was her first time to see such a strange little world. For other people, this may not be a suitable place for cultivation, but Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes turned to look at Zhang Yi, who was looking around. For her, it's probably the best place to practice, right? I read the information from Ji Tianya before, and it was said that it was the four ultimate sword formation that was comprehended based on the Zushan formation. Well, it should be said that it was comprehended by everyone in the sword world, so. Zhang Han thought for a while, and stood up in the air amid the doubtful looks of others. In the blink of an eye, he appeared high in the sky, the sun was rolling, and even the sunlight was full of sword intent. Now that he was a little closer, his whole body seemed to be washed by rays of sword intent. If Zhang Han hadn't just broken through scripture of indestructibility for the second time, he might not have been able to hold on. Detection. He glanced around the sword world and thought silently in his heart. Detecting. Testing completed. The sword realm was transformed from the first ancient killing formation, the Zhu Xian formation, and could not be activated due to the lack of the 4 Zhu Xian swords. After observing, you can get rewards. Choice 1, Wuhan, Sword World. Choice 2, Martial Spirit, Immortal Executing Sword damaged, as upgraded to Martial Spirit, Immortal Execution Sword formation incomplete. Note, if you choose one, the Martial Soul, Sword World can be fused with the Martial Soul, Immortal Executing Sword at any time in the future, and the upgrade will be Immortal Execution Sword formation. This fusion process is irreversible. Really? Zhang Han's eyes lit up. This sword world is formed by the Immortal Execution Sword formation. Because of this, it has such abundant sword intent. Just imagine, each of the 4 swords of Zhu Xian possesses unpredictable power, and the formation diagram can control them at the same time. Over time, how terrible the sword intent will be condensed in it. Choose one. Zhang Han didn't hesitate at all. Although he is more enthusiastic about the formation map, there is obviously no way to get it yet. The reason is simple. The 4 swords of Zhu Xian are missing and cannot be activated. Among them, the Immortal Executing Sword has been transformed into the 10 Peaks of Sword Sect. How can it be controlled if the cultivation level is not at a certain level? As for the other 3, I don't know where they are. Tomb of Tongtian, I have to find time to go there. Zhang Han thought to himself. No doubt, there are most likely to be other Immortal Slaying Sword, Absolute Immortal Sword and Immortal Sealing Sword there. Even if you can't take them away temporarily, it is a good thing to observe them and complete the Immortal Execution Sword formation. What is brother doing? Zhang Yi blinked her big eyes and looked at the motionless Zhang Han in the sky with curiosity. I don't know. Yi Qingluan shook his head gently. Just now, Zhang Han jumped into the air without saying a word, and then stood still in the sky, seemingly observing something. Boom! Sudden, huge shadows appeared behind Zhang Han. There is the towering heavenly sword mountain, the ancient and vast bronze temple, the Kunpeng with its wings hanging down for 9 days, and a lush giant tree with green branches and leaves as fluffy as a canopy. Is he observing martial arts? The girl spoke hesitantly, with a hint of uncertainty in her tone. If I read correctly, one of his martial spirits is Heavenly Sword Mountain, right? Yes. Li Mubai smiled bitterly. The first martial spirit that Zhang Han observed was Heavenly Sword Mountain. The second martial spirit should be Dapeng with the blood of Kunpeng. The third martial spirit came from nowhere, and the fourth martial spirit seemed to yes. He turned to look at Tang Yaoyao, who was silent and shrouded in a hazy green halo. It's me. Tang Tiantian nodded calmly. Interesting. The female child looked at Zhang Han in the air, showed an interested expression, and said, this is the first time I have seen so many strange martial arts. However, is there anything here that is worthy of his observation? Everyone shook their heads. Apart from swords, there is nothing unique here, because everything here is very unique compared to the outside world. You can't just observe everything, right? Each person can only have 10 martial souls. Otherwise, if they can watch and learn unlimitedly, wouldn't everyone have hundreds of millions of martial souls? When they fight, the sky will be filled with the martial souls that emerge directly from behind. Sudden, a vague shadow appeared behind Zhang Han, directly squeezing Heavenly Sword Mountain, World Tree and Kunpeng aside. It seemed to want to squeeze the bronze temple away, but failed. It can only be offset by half a position. What's this? Uncle Zhang frowned. The blurry shadow was very huge, even much bigger than Heavenly Sword Mountain. Why does it look familiar to me? Li Mubai looked hesitant. Of course you are familiar with it. The girl raised her head, staring at the huge shadow, with an unprecedented light flashing in her eyes, and murmured, because, that's where we are at the moment. Where are you now? After hearing the girl's words, everyone's first reaction was a little confused, but after all, no one present was stupid, and they understood what she meant in an instant. Master, you mean, Li Mubai swallowed hard, and his originally powerful state of mind was once again violently impacted. The martial spirit Zhang Han is observing is from the sword world. Good. The girl's eyes are as deep as the universe, and two ancient swords dance in her pupils, as if cutting through the endless darkness and void. They are swords. Everyone's expressions were extremely wonderful. What is this operation? What kind of genius is this? To watch an entire small world become a martial spirit is simply an eternity. For tens of thousands of years, there has never been such an example. Emperor, Master, you are worthy of being a master. Yi Qingluan murmured softly, with unconcealed admiration and adoration. Next to her, Uncle Zhang's eyes were full of complex colors. To be honest, he initially looked down on Zhang Han, and had strong resistance to his most elegant young lady becoming his disciple. He thought this was an insult to Yi Qingluan. However, today, he was blown away time and time again. Whether Zhang Han could see the flaw in Thunder God's wrath that even he couldn't find, or whether he was sitting cross-legged in the void and using the power of thunder to body temper, or whether he was using an entire small world as his martial spirit at this moment. Zhang Han's every move refreshes his views. Until now. What Uncle Zhang has to admit is that Zhang Han is indeed very, very good. He is more dazzling than some of the so-called geniuses in Zhongzhou. It cannot be calculated based on common sense. As for cultivation, for these geniuses, breakthroughs are simply commonplace. The only reason why Zhang Han is still stuck in the martial soul realm is that he has not found a more powerful martial soul, and there is no existence that can match the martial soul he has now. His temperament is even stronger than that of the martial king, and his background is not lacking at all. I need to talk to the head of the family about this. Uncle Zhang thought to himself. Undoubtedly, if Zhang Han does not die on the way, his future achievements will be limitless. Judging from what happened today, even facing a semi-saint, he could be unharmed. Zhang Bo asked himself, even without him today, Zhang Han could still get through this disaster safely. At this time, the girl withdrew her gaze from Zhang Han. She slowly floated into the air, staring indifferently at the huge flying sword suspended in the sky, and said coldly, "Why, you know that I am back, and you act like a turtle. Get out of here." Boom. Her voice was very soft at first, but in an instant, it resounded throughout the whole world like a bell. There was a brief silence. On the giant flying sword, figures emerged one after another. They turned into streaks of sword light and fell in front of the girl. At first glance, the weakest one was also the martial venerable. There were about 30 of them, and they all had their heads hanging down at the moment, like children who had done something wrong. The girl looked at them indifferently and said, "Did you know that Wan'er was persecuted by Ji Yulingyan and Ji Yu back then?" No one said a word. Although they are martial venerables, and some of them are even the girl's previous generation, they are still silent at the moment. Are you using your seniority to overwhelm the person in front of you? Do not make jokes. When she was not the leader of the sect, she was a famous female devil. She challenged the sect members all day long and beat them from bottom to top. Anyone present who had not been beaten 2 or 3 times by her would not be beaten. I'm embarrassed to say that I'm from the Sword Sect. This is what they know. Those who didn't know what they were talking about were already very cold and were beaten to death in the arena of life and death. This person has obviously reached the level of martial saint now. Who dares to mess with him? Are you all mute? The girl glanced at them coldly. A terrifying aura slowly emitted from her body, and the sword-shaped flowers, plants and trees around her were buzzing and trembling, as if they might rise from the ground at any time and become a murderous weapon. Everyone's backs were soaked with cold sweat, but no one dared to say a word. At this time, ripples appeared in the void, and a figure stepped out. It was an old man in white robes with white beard and hair. He looked at the girl, his face as dark as water. "Junior sister, why do you have to embarrass them? Ji Yu Tianya is a semi-saint practitioner, and they are still in the venerable realm world. It's not like you don't know the gap between them." Oh, the girl glanced at him coldly. Suddenly, she stretched out her hand and pinched the white-robed old man's neck. The 2 ancient swords in her eyes burst out with cold murderous intent. "What you said makes sense. Martial Venerable is indeed unable to compete with semi-saint. But, as you are also a semi-saint, are you still afraid of Ji Yu Tianya?" The girl's voice was cold, and her hand squeezed closer and closer, making the old man in white robes' face turn purple. This moment, he seemed to have become an ordinary person, unable to fight back. His breathing became increasingly difficult, and he could not mobilize even half of the strength in his body. If this continued, he might even suffocate. A semi-saint died due to suffocation. It is simply the biggest joke in the world. Master, junior sister, please spare my life. The face of the old man in white robe has turned into a purple color. Nuo Zhao's ever since he became the elder of the sword sect, he hadn't felt this feeling of approaching death for who knows how many years. And today, he once again realized what it means to have half a foot in the gate of hell. Thick fear swept through his body. Knowing right and wrong, yet letting it go, causing my disciple's body to be shattered, leaving only the primordial spirit alive, and it is still stubborn to this day. In consideration of your great contribution to the sword sect, I will spare your life. A simple sword shadow flew out of the girl's eyes and instantly penetrated into the belly of the white-robed old man, but it did not leave any scars. But death penalty can be avoided, but living crime cannot be avoided. The girl stared at him indifferently. I have planted the life-destroying sword seed in your body. For the next 100 years, you must obey my disciple Nangong's words, otherwise the life-destroying sword seed will activate on its own and swallow up all your life. Quote. After that, the girl threw it aside. The old man in white robes suddenly felt relieved and his breathing became smoother, but his face was very ugly, and there was a deep look of humiliation in his eyes, but he did not dare to say another word. He thought that after so many years, with the growth of cultivation, the female devil's temper would be better than before, but he didn't expect that she would still be so cruel. It's no different from before. If he says anything more and is not convinced, he will definitely be killed on the spot in the next second. The life-destroying sword species. The old man in white robes twitched his eyes. He didn't know what kind of evil secret technique it was, but he would never doubt what the girl said. Countless practices back then proved that she really meant what she said. That is to say, unless there is a stronger being who can help him drive away the life-destroying sword seed, he can only obey Nangong Wan's orders. As domineering as the legend. Beside, a faint smile flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes. For a long time, this girl's reputation was very loud, and she was famous in Zhongzhou. But she had never seen it. Because, after she grew up, this legendary figure had disappeared without a trace and disappeared from the world without leaving any trace, just like he had completely evaporated. At this time, above the sky, the shadow of the martial spirit behind Zhang Han became increasingly clear. It was so huge that it almost filled the entire sword. No, it was the sword world itself, but it was just an illusion. At first glance, it is extremely shocking. If he fights with someone in the future, once this martial spirit is released, it will scare the opponent to death, right? The corners of Li Mubai's eyes twitched. For any person, as long as they see this martial spirit, their mind will definitely lose control for a moment and fall into a short-term sluggish state, and a practitioner's momentary distraction may determine life or death. Indeed, Uncle Zhang nodded in agreement. Even semi-saint like him was a little confused when he saw the huge and boundless martial spirit, let alone those with low cultivation level. In the air, Zhang Han turned his head slightly, looked at Wuhan behind him, and frowned. It looks messy. It would be nice if they could be put together. He thought to himself. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, suddenly, his 5 martial souls started to move. The first one to bear the brunt was the Sword World martial soul. It sank down and overlapped with the real Sword World on this side. At first glance, they were indistinguishable. Each other. Followed by, the heavenly Sword Mountain martial spirit fell from the sky and stood in the center of the Sword World's martial spirit. Boom! The martial spirit of the Bronze Temple bloomed with endless divine light and was suppressed on the top of Heavenly Sword Mountain. The martial spirit of the World Tree took root unhurriedly on the left side of the gate of the Bronze Temple, with lush green leaves and luxuriant branches. Finally, Kunpeng's martial spirit spread its wings and slowly landed on the branches of the World Tree. Zhang Han. Everyone. Zhang Han looked confused. He just thought about it casually, but he didn't expect that a change actually occurred. All the martial arts were merged together. However, it looked much neater like this. It's not considered fusion, it can only be said to be connected together. Everyone was even more stunned. Even the girl who cultivated martial saint was stunned. After decades of traveling around the world, this was the first time she saw martial arts superimposed, and it seemed quite harmonious at first glance. Is this still a martial spirit? Uncle Zhang murmured. This is the question that everyone has in common. Zhang Han views the entire sword world as a martial spirit, which can be understood as his talent for understanding and transcendent, which is unparalleled and astonishing in the world. But the current scene is more than just talent. This is simply a groundbreaking feat. Martial spirit, can it really still be like this? Li Mubai murmured. 10 ancient shadows of long swords appeared behind him, and a sharp sword intent swept out. The sword sect has been passed down for an unknown amount of time, so naturally there are heavenly grade swords. Li Mubai's sword is heavenly grade. This sword is passed down from previous generations of sect masters. It's quite ancient. In fact, many outstanding disciples of the sword sect, under the leadership of their master, will visit various major sects in order to observe higher grade swords. Other sects will not refuse, this is a matter of courtesy. Just watch each other. Only in this way can we continuously enhance the strength of the sect and blindly protect ourselves. Although we can curb the growth rate of other sects in disguise, the same sects will also suffer losses because of this. Not to mention, in many cases, success cannot be achieved by simply observing. This is related to understanding and talent. Just like the sword world that Zhang Han observed. Let ordinary people observe here for a lifetime and they may not make any progress. It's hard. The girl shook her head gently. There have been many outstanding people throughout the ages. Naturally, some people have thought about fusing martial spirits together to unleash greater power, but no one has succeeded. Otherwise, it will definitely leave a mark in history. Li Mubai tried it, and the 10 martial soul sword shadows behind him gathered in one direction, but they quickly failed. They seem to have a repulsive force. It may not be impossible. At this moment, World Tree Tang Tiantian suddenly said, "Don't we, the monsters, only have one martial soul?" This shows that it should be feasible for humans to fuse 10 martial souls into one, but you haven't found the right way. Hear the words. Everyone was lost in thought. Tang Yao Yao is right. Monster race martial spirits observe themselves, because they often cultivate into human forms, and human forms are naturally short-term, so their bodies are naturally the best martial spirits and the most suitable. After they turn into human form, they are actually half a person. Yi Qingluan nodded gently. She is originally a human, but the blood in her body has returned to her ancestors. Qingluan's blood is extremely rich. After being activated with the help of her master, she can transform into Qingluan's body at any time. However, the human form is more suitable for performing combat skills. Speaking of fundamentals, Yi Qingluan is still a human being fundamentally. But she will only have one martial spirit, and that is Qingluan. Actually, you might as well think about it from another angle. At this time, a voice with a faint chuckle slowly passed down from the air. Everyone looked up after hearing this. I saw that Zhang Han had put away his huge martial spirit, and he landed lightly on the ground, his clothes moving with the wind, and his demeanor was free and unrestrained. Change the angle. The girl looked at him with interest. My friend, please elaborate. 11. Her title has changed. It is obvious that she values Zhang Han particularly highly and no longer regards her as an ordinary junior. I want to ask a question first. Zhang Han looked at them and asked, what do you think the function of Wuhan is? Effect. Li Mubai frowned slightly and muttered. The realm of martial arts is a very important part of the human race's cultivation system. Every time you observe a martial spirit, your strength will increase to a certain extent. The more powerful the martial spirit, the higher the improvement. Many times, the gap is widened in this realm, so there is also a huge gap among people at the same level. Moreover, martial spirits can also assist in combat. Said. The ancient sword in Li Mubai's hand was unsheathed. 10 martial spirits behind him separated and got into the ancient sword. In an instant, the sword shone brightly, and its sharpness was obviously much stronger than before. What about the remaining 9? Zhang Han looked at the 9 martial arts suspended behind him and asked. Li Mubai shook his head and said, as we all know, although there are 10 martial spirits, only one of them can be used to increase combat power during battle. In different situations, martial spirits with different attributes can be used. So we were just shocked that your martial spirits could be fused together. Wrong. Zhang Han showed a half-smiling expression. My martial spirits are not fused, they are just combined together. Fusion and combination may seem similar at first glance, but they are completely different. Take the Sect Master as an example. You have 10 sword-shaped martial spirits, so why not consider combining them into a sword formation? In this way, wouldn't you be able to use the power of 10 martial spirits at the same time? Sword array. Li Mubai's eyes showed a look of astonishment. The girl on the side also frowned, her eyes shining with thought. Is this possible? Uncle Zhang looked puzzled. Since ancient times, all practitioners have a fixed understanding of martial arts. During battle, they can only use the power of one martial spirit to increase their combat ability. In different situations, use different martial arts to exert your best strength. This is the experience left over thousands of years. Therefore, in ancient times, some people would try to fuse martial souls, because if they could successfully fuse the martial souls into one, it would be one martial soul. Its power will naturally increase significantly. It stands to reason that it shouldn't be. Nandong Wan's primordial spirit spoke softly. If 10 martial spirits are combined together, aren't they still 10 martial spirits? You'll know after you try it. Li Mubai spoke in a deep voice. Brush. His fingers were filled with spiritual power, and he quickly sketched out formations, flying into the air. In just a few breaths, 10 small sword formations were formed at a speed visible to the naked eye. This formation is called the 10 directions sword formation, and exactly 10 swords are needed to perform it. Li Mubai flicked his fingers. A drop of blood flew out from his fingers and landed on the center of the 10-directional sword array constructed with spiritual power in the air, like a bit of cinnabar. Go! Li Mubai shouted lowly. The Shifang sword formation swayed slightly and appeared behind him. Next moment, the 10 martial soul sword shadows he drove landed on 10 different positions of the 10-directional sword formation, and the bright swords burst out in an instant, shining in all directions. Success! Everyone stared at the Shifang sword formation. Even the old man in white robe looked at this scene with a serious expression, showing special concern, because this matter is so important that it can subvert the original practice system. Sudden. The 10 shadows of martial spirits trembled, and then suddenly dispersed, and the 10-direction sword formation was instantly destroyed. Failed. Li Mubai shook his head. Zhang Han frowned slightly, thought for a moment, and said, Sect Master, try again. Good. Li Mubai did not hesitate and sketched the sword formation again. The same thing as before happened immediately. Just when he was about to succeed, the 10 martial spirit sword shadows suddenly became unstable, and then the sword formation was shattered. It doesn't seem feasible. Uncle Zhang looked regretful. If he can really succeed, then he will be a witness to historical changes, enough to be recorded in history. However, it failed. Zhang Han read it quietly and smiled. Just now, he had checked the information of the 10 directions sword formation and discovered the problems in it, but the words in his mind had not yet been discussed. 10 directions sword formation unformed. The formation diagram is condensed by spiritual power, and the sword is composed of martial souls, so it is extremely unstable. If you use your own soul power to outline a sword formation and use your martial soul as a sword, you can get a reward, the 10 directions sword formation. Master, why are you laughing? Yi Qingluan observed the words, and his heart moved slightly. Could it be that you have a solution? Good. Zhang Han looked at Li Mubai. He glanced at the white-robed old man with his ears pricked and the other supreme elders of the sword sect and suddenly fell silent. The girl understood what he meant and waved her hands to set up a barrier. They can't hear you. Zhang Han then smiled and said, Sect Master, your martial soul is an important part of the sword formation, but if you use the spiritual power in your body to outline the formation, of course it is impossible to succeed. You mean? Li Mubai showed doubts. I see. On the side, a bright light flashed in the girl's eyes, and she said thoughtfully, My little friend, are you trying to say that the formation diagram does not match the swords that make up the sword formation? Yes. Zhang Han smiled and nodded. To a certain extent, the martial soul is condensed from the soul power of the practitioner, but just now the sect leader used spiritual power to outline the sword formation. Spiritual power and soul power are completely different, naturally does not match. Hear the words. Li Mubai's eyes brightened, and Qing and others beside him were also thoughtful. Outside the barrier, the supreme elders of the Sword Sect looked at the barrier eagerly. Although it was close at hand, it was as if they were far away from each other, unable to see or hear, cutting off everything. I will try again. Li Mubai closed his eyes. Behind him, lines of Dao lines that were almost invisible to the naked eye emerged. This was what he was drawing with his soul power. He had never tried it before, so the speed was quite slow. Everyone was very patient and watched carefully. A long while passed. The formation gradually took shape. The 10 martial soul sword shadows behind Li Mubai were slowly distributed in 10 different directions of the formation. Their movements were gentle, as if they were afraid of causing the formation to collapse again. Everyone's mood became extremely nervous. After all, this was a groundbreaking scene. Success must be successful, Nangong Wan's primordial spirit murmured in a low voice. She glanced at Zhang Han and saw that he was smiling and calm, as if he was confident. Somehow, his emotions might have been infected, and she suddenly calmed down. After a while, the 10 martial soul sword shadows finally landed in a completely different direction. Formation diagram: the soldiers did not collapse. But this is not considered a success, because it only stabilizes them. If the sword array can be activated and used in actual combat, then it will be truly accomplished. Li Mubai opened his eyes and took a deep breath. He looked back at the 10 directions sword formation behind him, and a drop of transparent blood emerged from between his eyebrows. It was soul blood. Brush. The soul blood fell on the eye of the 10 directions sword formation. In an instant, bright sword lights were inspired, and the shadows of the 10 martial soul swords slowly rotated, floating from behind Li Mubai to the top of his head. Waves of soft sword energy fell down, enveloping him. Boom! Li Mubai's aura instantly rose to a new level, with the sword intent lingering all over his body. There was a look of surprise on his face. Everyone around him saw his expression and knew the result instantly. The door was successful. Success. There was undisguised surprise in Li Mubai's eyes. He could clearly feel that after the blessing of the martial soul, his strength was several times higher than before. It's terrifying. Surprisingly, it's really possible. Uncle Zhang's eyes were a little dazed and he murmured. He witnessed with his own eyes this major event that could subvert the world of cultivation. Wahan could still be used in this way. The inherent thoughts that had been passed down through the ages were abruptly broken. Nangong Wan's primordial spirit trembled slightly, showing her inner unrest. Seeing Zhang Han's confident look just now, she already had a rough guess about the final result, but after seeing it with her own eyes, she still found it incredible. 697, comes all the way. She followed Zhang Yi and witnessed Zhang Han blooming more and more dazzlingly. At first, Nangong Wan's hope was placed on Zhang Yi, hoping that after she became stronger, she would help him take revenge. Unexpectedly, before she could grow up, this revenge would already be avenged. The one who did all this is Zhang Han. If Master's move is carried forward, all practitioners in the world will be grateful to him. Yi Qingluan spoke softly, suddenly waking up everyone who was in shock and daze. Yes, such a feat that subverts the previous inherent understanding is enough for countless practitioners to praise him and call him a master in the world. Will not. At this time, the girl suddenly said, some people praise it, and some people will criticize it and destroy it. In theory, this move can indeed be said to benefit the world, but not everyone thinks so. Why? Nangong Wan asked doubtfully. The reason is simple. Zhang Han laughed softly and said in a calm tone, not everyone's martial soul can do this. If the martial soul is slightly mixed, it may not be possible. The reason why the sect leader can do it is because his martial soul is all it's a sword. In this way, some people will become stronger and some will become weaker. Even though it is only relatively weak, it is enough to make them hate me. Hear the words. Everyone suddenly realized. If you think about it carefully, this is really the truth. For some people, their martial souls can be combined together in a unique way to explode with greater power, so they naturally become stronger. However, a large number of people's martial arts are very mixed, and there is no fixed system. As a result, naturally there is no way to combine martial souls, let alone become stronger. They may even feel that because of this initiative, they will become relatively weak. Naturally, the insults came flooding in. Wouldn't it be nice to announce it now? Zhang Yi suddenly said crisply. Good. Zhang Han smiled slightly. touched her head, and said calmly, I am not a saint, and I will not think about the world. Therefore, this so-called initiative will not be made public at the moment. The medical treatment will also attract infamy. As soon as this statement came out, Yi Qingluan immediately said, Uncle Zhang, this matter must not be spread without the consent of Master. Yes, Uncle Zhang nodded seriously. After hesitating for a moment, he looked at Zhang Han and asked tentatively, Mr. Zhang, I don't know about this. Can I tell the Yi family? I hope not for a while. Zhang Han turned to look at him, his eyes were very calm, and said, however, your mouth is on your body, and I have no ability to stop you. Ask yourself whether you want to tell me. Temporary. Uncle Zhang noticed this word keenly. Good. Zhang Han said calmly, for now. I see. Uncle Zhang nodded thoughtfully and said decisively, Mr. Zhang, please don't worry, I will never tell the Yi family about this matter, unless I get your consent in the future. Mr. Zhang, can you help me take a look at the martial spirit of this old man? Can it be combined? His address to Zhang Han became, you. Although his cultivation level is much higher than that of Zhang Han, Uncle Zhang believes in his heart that the current Zhang Han is absolutely qualified to deserve this nickname. This is respect for the pioneers. Zhang Han nodded slightly and said, let it out and take a look. Hear the words. 10 shadows of martial spirits immediately appeared behind Uncle Zhang. Zhang Han looked at them carefully, then his expression became a little strange, and he said slowly, these martial spirits of yours are very special. Why do you say that? Because all his martial arts spirits are pens. There are a total of 10 branches, each with different sizes and thicknesses. It is really hard to know what to say. Young master, you don't know something. Uncle Zhang showed a hint of embarrassment. When I broke through the martial arts, I was a sour scholar who was obsessed with writing and painting. Later, I got the inheritance from an ancient and got to this point. As a result, for so many years, Lao Chan's martial arts spirits have never had the slightest effect. So, has your painting skill been left behind? Zhang Han asked. No. Uncle Zhang shook his head and said in a deep voice, I have only one hobby in my life, and I have never stopped it for many years. I see. Zhang Han stared at him twice and already had a general idea in his mind, but just to be sure, he said silently, how to combine his martial arts. Buzz. The words come to mind. Zhang Tianlin, due to the large gap in cultivation, cannot be detected for the time being. If you tell the other party that you can integrate the painting way into the space way you cultivate and use it to combine martial arts, you can get rewards, Zhang Tianlin's gratitude and respect, and unknown ancient inheritance. Closing square bracket. Really? A smile appeared at the corner of Zhang Han's mouth. Similar to what he imagined, Tianlin's painting method and space method can be perfectly combined. Does the young master have an idea? Zhang Tianlin asked quickly when he saw his smile. Kindness. Zhang Han chuckled and said, since your martial arts are all kinds of pens, why not just use the 10 martial arts as the brush, your own soul power as the ink, and the boundless space as the paper to learn to paint? Not a good job. Zhang Tianlin was suddenly shocked. Zhang Han's understatement resounded in his mind like a thunder that shook the sky, echoing endlessly. Use the martial soul as the pen, the soul power as the ink, and the space as the pen. This was something he had never imagined. Over the years, these martial spirits have become Zhang Tianlin's heart. He has always regretted it. If he had not casually observed 10 pens as martial arts spirits back then he should have entered the martial arts world now, right? He has never considered what help 10 pens as martial spirits can bring to him. After all, no matter how you think about it, there is no connection between space and the pen. Until today, I was awakened by Zhang Yanqi. Thank you for your advice, sir. Zhang Tianlin looked solemn, cupped his fists with his hands, and bowed deeply to Zhang Han. This gift, regardless of the level of cultivation, regardless of the strength, is just because of the grace of preaching and resolving doubts. From now on, Zhang Tianlin has been stagnant in his semi-saint cultivation for an unknown amount of time. He finally has the possibility of a breakthrough. Even if there is only a glimmer of possibility, it is much better than the slightest hope. On the side, Yi Qingluan also showed a hint of joy in his beautiful eyes. She knew that what troubled Uncle Zhang his whole life was the martial spirit of those 10 pens, so he never released the martial spirit, and he could not let it go until his death in later generations. No need to be polite. Zhang Han nodded casually. Only one gift is not enough to thank you for your great kindness. Uncle Zhang straightened up and said in a deep voice, I had the opportunity in the past to achieve what I am today, but my talent is dull and I can't understand it thoroughly. The young master's talent is astonishing, so the old man borrowed flowers to offer to the Buddha and gave this opportunity to the young master. Say it. He carefully took out a sealed black jade bottle, handed it to Zhang Han, and said, the opportunity is in this bottle. I once took one of them, but I have reached the limit of my body and dare not use it more. The rest can be decided by the young master at will. Oh, Zhang Han reached out and took it, his heart moved slightly. Just now, Uncle Zhang said that he had chosen one of them, which showed that the chance was not shared. He also said that he had reached the limit of his physical body. Could it be some kind of genius treasure that enhances the physical strength? There were so many people at this time that Zhang Han did not open the jade bottle, but put it away. At this moment, Uncle Zhang seemed to have thought of something and hurriedly said to Yi Qingluan, Miss, when you are observing the first martial spirit, you must not make your own decisions. You must listen to your master's instructions. Observe the first martial spirit. The girl watching quietly beside her raised her eyebrows slightly, isn't she already a martial spirit? The jade pendant that conceals one's cultivation level can only block the detection of cultivators below martial saint. It is naturally useless for martial saint like her. What? Uncle Zhang was shocked. You can't escape the eyes of saint. Yi Qingluan smiled bitterly, with a trace of exploration in her beautiful eyes. She looked at Zhang Han and saw him nodding slightly, and then said, Uncle Zhang, don't worry. My martial spirit was guided by my master. That's good, that's good. Zhang Bo suddenly breathed a long sigh of relief. After seeing Zhang Han's incredible abilities, he was completely impressed. If his young lady hadn't already worshipped Zhang Han as his teacher, he would have wanted to become a nominal disciple of Zhang Han. The ancient sages once said that there is a sequence of hearing the Tao, because there is a dictatorship. Although Zhang Han is young and his cultivation is still lacking, in terms of his unique insights in cultivation, Zhang Bo thinks that he is far inferior to him. Not to mention, if nothing else happens, many years later, Zhang Han's unprecedented initiative will still be revealed to the world, and it will definitely leave a mark in the annals of history and be remembered forever. In this life, there may be some people who will blame him, scold him and hate him. But future generations will definitely respect him as a sage. The saint of martial saint and the sage of sage have completely different meanings. The former only means cultivation, but the latter represents merit. You guys go out first. At this time, the girl said calmly, I want to talk to some old guys who are in retreat. Warner, you have to make a choice within 7 days, whether you want to find a body for you as a teacher or turn to Ghost Dao yourself. Decide. As for the martial arts matter, if these guys outside ask you, let them come to find me. Say it. Her figure flickered and disappeared. The barrier used to block them then dissipated, and the supreme elders of Jianzong were seen looking at them eagerly, with their ears pricked up and their eyes as bright as light bulbs. Ahem, that. An old man coughed dryly and looked at Li Mubai. Mubai, I treated you well back then, didn't I? Not thin, not thin. Li Mubai knew it well and said with a smile, but Master Lu, if it's about Wuhan, you'd better not speak out. Master just said that if any of you masters or uncles ask about this matter, they should go to her. Old man. Hear the words. The expressions of all the supreme elders suddenly turned bitter. Go find that female devil. Looking for something to smoke. They didn't say anything more, and left one by one with sighs and worries, and soon only the white-robed old man with semi-saint cultivation was left. Others dare to leave, but he doesn't dare to leave. After all, the female devil planted life-destroying sword seeds in his body, so he had no choice but to obey Nangong Wan's orders. Uncle Chu, you should be in the sword world. Nangong Wan's primordial spirit looked at him and said calmly, if anything happens, my beloved son will be yours. No problem. The white-robed old man's face suddenly became happy, and he disappeared in a flash of sword light. It was a kind of torture for him to listen to the orders of a younger disciple. He prayed secretly in his heart that it would be best for Nangongwan to never come to him for anything. Everyone left the sword world. Li Mubai hurriedly went to comfort the frightened disciples, and charged 3 generations of the Gu family with criminal sect to explain what happened today. In fact, the Gu family did seriously violate the rules of the sword sect. Uncle Zhang went to study his martial spirit. The 9th peak. The world tree took root again, while Nangongwan chatted animatedly with Zhang Yi and Yi Qingluan. She was not an easy-going person either. She had long been suffocated by staying in the jade pendant. Zhang Han sat on the branch of the world tree and slowly opened the black bottle that Uncle Zhang gave him. In an instant, an extremely powerful blood energy rushed towards the face, mixed with a wild, vast, ancient atmosphere, and emitted strange fluctuations, causing the space to ripple like water waves. Chapter 86. What an amazing spirit! Zhang Han was surprised. The semi-saint in Gu Tianya was bleeding before. The spurting blood was already strong, rolling like the red sun. However, compared with the contents of this black jade bottle, it was as clear as water. The most terrifying thing is that the fluctuations it emits distort the void. What can be put in such a small jade vase? Zhang Han shook slightly. There was a tinkling sound coming from the bottle, which was very crisp. If Uncle Zhang didn't lie, then all his opportunities came from the things inside. One can imagine. A person who didn't care about spiritual practice when he was young and just watched a few pens as martial arts spirits could actually grow into a semi-saint. What's in the jade bottle is terrifying. He pondered for a while. Zhang Han took out a piece of jade from the storage ring, and then gently poured out the contents of the jade bottle. This is... He froze. There are only 3 small red beads in the jade bottle. The majestic blood energy was emanating from them. Once exposed, the void suddenly became more distorted, and ripples visible to the naked eye centered on the 3 beads and spread out in all directions. If it was originally just a stone thrown into the water, then now it is a huge stone that hits the lake and stirs up a large number of flowers. Uncle Zhang just ate a bead. Zhang Han narrowed his eyes. What Zhang Bo cultivates is the way of space. Why can it be obtained with just 1 bead? At this moment, World Tree's voice sounded in his mind. The blood energy of these 3 beads is beyond imagination. I'm afraid that the total amount of blood and essence in my body cannot compare to one of them. Hearing this, Zhang Han felt slightly shocked. There is no doubt that the richness of World Tree's blood energy is comparable to that of divine beasts, but it actually says that the total blood energy in its entire body is not as good as one of the beads. Detect backquote. Zhang Han thought silently in his heart. Detecting. Testing completed. The essence and blood of ancestral witch Emperor Zhang possesses majestic blood energy, which contains the laws of space. Forged with the 9 yang true fire, melted into liquid, taken orally, and listened to any fairy music, you can get rewards, increase the strength of the physical body, and understand the laws of space. Closing square bracket. Dijong. Zhang Han's eyes twitched. The head of the 12 ancestral witches, the ancestral witch of space. No wonder there is such a terrifying blood energy. It turns out that this son is the spirit of Dijong. To know, the 12 ancestral witches are transformed from the essence and blood of Pangu, which means that the essence and blood of Dijong is actually part of Pangu's essence and blood. Even if the amount is very small, it is not comparable to that of World Tree. It's 9 yang true fire again. Zhang Han had a headache after seeing the introduction. The primordial spirit combat skill, sword throw, he previously obtained from Ji Yulingyun contained the supreme secret skill, kill with sword. One of the things he needed to get it was Juyang. Exclamation mark. Now if I want to completely absorb Di Yang's essence and blood, I have to use 9 yang true fire. And you also need to listen to any fairy music. Also drunk. Who knows what kind of music can be called fairy music? Zhang Han sighed, put the beads back into the black jade bottle, and put them away again. Although Uncle Zhang took a piece of Emperor Yang's essence and blood, he probably didn't really refine it, otherwise breaking through to the martial saint would be a matter of course, and there would be no stagnation at all. Think about it for a long time. Zhang Han took out a fragment from the ring and stared at it in confusion. This fragment was the apprenticeship ceremony, given to her by Yi Qingluan on the day she became her disciple. It seemed ordinary, but in fact it had a great origin. It was a fragment of Chaos Bell. Chaos Bell is infinite in mystery and creation. It can imprison time, suppress space, and integrate attack and defense. But now, it is just a fragment. The Chaos Bell fragment has been severely damaged and its origin is unknown. It is suspected to be left by the ancient power. After watching, you can get rewards. Martial Spirit, Chaos Bell, Fragment, Ancient Golden Crow. Short information. Closing square bracket. The information about the fragments came to mind again. Exactly the same as before. After observing, you can get the location information of the ancient Golden Crow tomb. Zhang Han guessed that if there is a place in the world where 9 Yang True Fire exists, then Shizo will be there. The only price is to occupy the position of a martial spirit. It would be fine if it were a complete Chaos Bell. Zhang Han would observe it without hesitation, but it is just fragments. Sister Yao Yao. Zhang Han suddenly asked, have you heard of Juyang True Fire? 9 Yang True Fire. The gentle voice of World Tree rang in her mind, and she paused before continuing. I heard Xiaoyao Martial Emperor mention that it seems to only exist in the descriptions in ancient books, and is related to the ancient mythical beast 3-legged golden crow. She once wanted to find, but not found. Really? Zhang Han rolled his eyes. After going around and around, it still landed on the golden crow. Quote. That's all. Zhang Han no longer hesitated, stared at the fragments in his hands, and said silently, observe. He still has a chance anyway. Judging from these few martial arts observations, one's own martial soul can evolve. For example, Heavenly Sword Mountain can evolve into Immortal Executing Sword, and Immortal Executing Sword can be merged with Sword World to form Immortal Execution Sword formation. It's obvious. The basic requirement for evolution and integration is that there is a connection between them. In other words, as long as Zhang Han can find other Chaos Bell fragments, he might be able to observe the real Chaos Bell martial spirit. Thinking of this, Zhang Han calmed down and observed carefully. After a while, boom, his martial spirit emerged, and the sword world instantly spanned an unknown number of miles, like a mirage, attracting the attention of countless sword sect disciples, Nuo Li Jiao, their eyes full of horror. Above the sword world, a fragment slowly appeared in the sky above the bronze temple. Vaguely, a shadow of a bell appeared. But it's gone in an instant. Zhang Han took a quick glance and barely saw the whole picture of Chaos Bell, which was the same as in the mythical legend. The outside of the bell was surrounded by the sun, moon, stars, earth, water, wind and fire, with 5 colors of light looming, and the atmosphere of chaos filled the air. Next moment, Zhang Han's vision became blurry. He seemed to see a 3-legged golden crow flying across the sky, burning the sky and boiling the sea. A moment later, they let out a long and shrill cry one after another, as if they were shot by something, and turned into rounds of scorching sun and fell from the sky. The screen flashed. The falling golden crow disappeared, and a slightly forlorn figure emerged from Zhang Han's eyes. He stood quietly in the void with an ancient bell of chaos above his head. As if feeling his gaze, the body slowly. Boom. As the figure slowly turned its head, his whole body burned with blazing flames, sweeping across the sky, as if it was about to ignite the entire world. Suddenly, the flames disappeared. The figure seemed to be stunned for a moment, then showed a faint smile and opened his mouth to say something. But Zhang Han could only see his lips moving, but couldn't hear them. The next second, the screen disappears. At the last moment, Zhang Han seemed to see the figure nodding towards him and stretching out a hand, as if ready to wave goodbye. Dongwang Tai. Zhang Han's vision gradually returned to normal and he murmured. With the creature above his head, Chaos Bell, he could only think of such a being. But why? The other party seemed to see him, which was clearly separated by eternity of time and space, and even Chaos Bell was broken. It is conceivable that Dongwang Tai may have disappeared into the dust of history. Is it because of Chaos Bell? Zhang Han pondered. One of the characteristics of Chaos Bell is to imprison time and suppress space. The Chaos Bell fragment in his hand may still have a weak power, and has a subtle connection with the Chaos Bell in the ancient times, which led to this scene. The location information of the ancient Golden Crow tomb. Zhang Han looked at a map that came to mind. There was a flame symbol somewhere on it, which made him frown slightly. Where is he? What the hell is this place? Open one's eyes. Zhang Han thought for a while, looked at the 3 girls Yi Qingluan who were talking quietly not far away, and said, Qingluan, come here. It's Yi Qingluan quickly stood up and walked over. Master, what are your orders? Come and see. Zhang Han fell from the branches of the world tree, grabbed a handful of water from the nearby pool, and quickly sketched an identical map on the ground according to the map in his mind. Yi Qingluan looked at it for a few times. Is this a map? Good. Zhang Han nodded slightly. Do you know where the place with the flame mark is? Mark of fire. Yi Qingluan carefully observed the map, and at the same time quickly searched the memories in his mind. After a moment, his eyes lit up slightly, and he said, Master, this place should be in the west. Zitu. Zhang Han frowned. Zhongzhou, Dongguan, Nanling, Zitu and Beiyu. Needless to say, Zhongzhou is naturally the most powerful. The sword sect is located in the eastern wilderness, where there are many large and small sects competing against each other. The south ridge is surrounded by mountains and clusters of tribes. Although there are plains, they occupy very little area. The northern territory is desolate and extremely old. But Zitu is the most special place. In addition to temples, there are also monasteries and temples there. Buddhism is extremely prosperous. Almost everyone believes in Buddhist Gate, so it is also a place of pilgrimage for Buddhist Gate believers in other major states. Yes, Yi Qingluan had been to Zitu in his previous life and was deeply impressed by it. But naturally she couldn't say these words, so she thought for a while and said, the flame mark on the map should be the far west of the Western Land, also known as the Land of Sunset, which is a magma sea. Hear the words. Zhang Han immediately determined that the place in the far west that Yi Qingluan mentioned was the location of the ancient Golden Crow tomb. Isn't the place of sunset the place where the sun falls? The three-legged golden crow is the sun in ancient times. The picture that came to mind before showed that the golden crows fell one by one. I am afraid that they landed there, causing the sea of magma and fire to appear. And the 9 yang true fire must be there. It seems that I have to go to the west. Zhang Han thought to himself. Master, where are you going? A trace of worry flashed in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes, and he said softly, the Western Land is very mysterious. It is known as the Buddhist Gate Sacred Land. According to legend, the peerless great demon was suppressed there. The power of faith there is extremely strong, and it is easy to make people affected. If you are determined, what do you have to fear? Zhang Hanhun didn't care. That's what Master said. There was a hint of helplessness in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes. When she went to the Western Land in her previous life, she was already a martial venerable, but she was almost converted by an old bald donkey and almost escaped into Buddhism. If it weren't for the self-defense treasure given by my father, Ched, I might have become a nun. However, Master should be fine. Yi Qingluan said to himself. In her past and present life, Zhang Han was the most special person she had ever seen. It seemed that any miracle happening to him would not be a surprise. Correct. At this time, Zhang Han asked casually, have you heard any more wonderful music in Zhongzhou? Wonderful tune. Yi Qingluan thought for a while and said, there are many people who are good at music in Zhongzhou, and Celestial Melody Pavilion is the best among them. The contemporary successor is called the Miaoyan Fairy, and his music is full of music. Celestial Melody Pavilion, Celestial Melody Pavilion. Zhang Han silently wrote down these two names. Master, do you want to listen to music? Yi Qingluan blinked his bright eyes and said curiously. Good. Zhang Han nodded slightly and said calmly, I am very interested in music. If I have the opportunity in the future, I will go and visit the Celestial Melody Pavilion. Disciples can introduce me to Master. Yi Qingluan smiled sweetly, like flowers coming to life, sweet and pleasant. Fairy Miaoyan has a good relationship with her disciples. They had many interactions when they were young. It is extremely difficult for others to ask her to play music, but it is a trivial matter for disciples. One pile. Then I'll trouble you. Zhang Han looked at her and gave her a slightly surprised look. But when I thought about it again, I felt relieved again. After all, the Yi family is a big family in Zhongzhou, and Celestial Melody Pavilion is also in Zhongzhou. It must also be a big sect. It is very normal for these forces to often have contact with each other. What did Master say? Hearing this, Yi Qingluan's pretty face became slightly solemn and said seriously. It is a blessing for a disciple to be able to help the Master solve problems. By the way, Master, just now I was chatting with Junior Uncle Yi Yi. She seemed to be very confused about which martial spirit she wanted to observe. Do you have any suggestions? Yi's martial spirit. Zhang Han was stunned for a moment, then slowly frowned. He ignored this matter. Zhang Yi's first martial spirit was the immortal executing sword. Although it was only damaged, it was not comparable to the ordinary heavenly grade sword. But it is not easy to find a sword of the same level as the immortal executing sword. Talk about it. The Zushan formation is a good choice, but what next? After pondering for a moment, Zhang Han waved his hand to Yi Qingluan to retreat, and then his body turned into swordlight and came to Heavenly Sword Mountain. Zhang Han, seeing his arrival, Li Mubai, who had almost finished handling the sect's affairs, smiled. Now your title as the leader of the ninth peak is justified. No disciple dares to be unconvinced. What's the matter with coming to me now? Have, Zhang Han asked bluntly, in the eastern wilderness, besides our sword sect, is there any legend about the sword anywhere else? The legend about the sword. Li Mubai frowned. He naturally knew that Zhang Han was referring to the sword sect Heavenly Sword Mountain. According to legend, there was a battle between two powerful beings. The outcome was unknown, but a broken sword fell down and turned into a quote exclamation mark quote. After pondering for a moment, Li Mubai's eyes flashed and he said slowly, Iron Sword Gate. Iron Sword Gate. A hint of surprise flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. Yes. Li Mubai narrowed his eyes and said slowly, over the years, countless swordsmanship sects have appeared in the eastern wilderness, but the only one that can truly compete with my sword sect is Iron Sword Gate. Legend has it that the ancestor of the Iron Sword Gate is a martial god, and he inserted a pure black giant sword in the center of their sect. After countless tests by later generations, they determined that it was an iron sword. However, the sword was very strong, and nothing could leave a trace on it. And no one can shake it even one bit. Iron Sword Gate has a supreme sect rule, that is, if anyone can pull out the iron sword, then it is the saint child or saintess of Iron Sword Gate, whose status is more noble than the sect master. I also went to observe it back then, but I didn't succeed in turning it into my own martial spirit. Li Mubai's tone was rather regretful. Zhang Han gave him a strange look and said, Sect master, you must have done more than just observe, right? Ahem. Li Mubai coughed awkwardly. I also tried to pull it out a little bit. Anyway, it's useless if you don't pull it out, right? Even if you become the Iron Sword Gate Saint Child, it won't hinder you as a disciple of the Sword Sect. Quote. Zhang Han's look at him suddenly became even weirder. Don't look at me like that. Li Mubai rolled his eyes, stroked his long beard and said, this is the rule of Iron Sword Gate. Anyone can be a saint child or saintess. It does not prevent you from doing other things, but you must hold such an identity. Correct. Suddenly something moved in his heart. You suddenly ask this, do you want Yi to observe the martial arts? Right. Zhang Han joked casually. She already has her first martial spirit, which is a sword brought by Yi Qingluan. What she is going to observe now is her second martial spirit. How about my sword? Li Mubai stretched out his hand to grab it, and an ancient sword flew from the depths of the hall. Trembling, the sword passed down by the successive masters of the sword sect, heavenly grade lower level. Not qualified. Zhang Han glanced at it and said casually. Isn't this enough? Li Mubai frowned. The sword in his hand seemed a little unconvinced by these words. It vibrated and made a clear sword sound. Not enough. Zhang Han stood up and walked towards the outside of the hall. Okay, that's it. I will take Yi to the Iron Sword Gate for a walk now. I go with you. Li Mubai put away the ancient sword in his hand and said in a deep voice, Iron Sword Gate and our sword sect have always been at odds with each other. If you go alone with Yi, although they will not stop Yi from watching, they will inevitably encounter some troubles. No. Zhang Han didn't look back, stretched out his hand and waved, I'll take Qingluan. Watching his back disappear, Li Mubai's mouth twitched, and then he let out a long sigh. Being the leader of this sect always feels boring. After all, Zhang Yi was also his disciple in name. As a master, he couldn't help him with anything on weekdays. Even what happened just now was because of Zhang Yi's existence. Why? Li Mubai shook his head, looking helpless. The main thing is that Zhang Yi's Wugo sword body is too powerful, and there is no need for him to teach her anything. She can master it as soon as she sees it, and she can master it as soon as she learns it. Just give her a good practice environment and skills. Suddenly, the space opened and a figure stepped forward. Li Mubai's face became solemn, and he immediately stood up and said respectfully, Master. The girl sat on a chair next to her and waved her hand, sit down. Here, you are the sect leader, and your teacher is just an elder. How are the impacts of the GU family's affairs being handled? Li Mubai sat down as he was told and said respectfully, the GU family has been designated as the ruling sect. I'm afraid it will take some time for the disciples' emotions to stabilize. Take it easy. The girl looked calm and said, do you have a candidate for the new peak leader of the 7th peak? Junior sister Nangong. Li Mubai said without hesitation, the 9th peak already belongs to Zhang Han, so she is the best candidate to lead the 7th peak. No, the girl rejected it outright. Li Mubai suddenly showed a look of astonishment and asked with confusion on his face, why? The girl glanced at him and said calmly, do you think you can keep Zhang Han in Zhanzong? It won't be long before he goes out to travel. Rot. Disciples are mentally prepared. Li Mubai nodded, still confused, but what does this have to do with junior sister Nangong? Even if Zhang Han goes out to travel, he is still the peak leader of the 9th peak, so he can't let junior sister Nan take over the position again, right? Although the evil energy of the 9th peak does not hurt anyone, almost no one in the past has had a good ending, including junior sister Nangong. But Zhang Han is different. His sister Zhang Yi has Wu Guo sword body after all. No matter how strong the sword evil is, it will only be eliminated by her and will not have any impact on Zhang Han. The disciples privately believe that Zhang Han can always serve as the 9th peak host. Li Mubai's eyes were extremely serious. This is the reason why the 9th peak has been abandoned for a long time, and it is also the reason why he made Zhang Han the leader of the 9th peak. Looking at the world, the only one who can completely eliminate the sword evil is the Wushu sword body. The girl remained expressionless and shook her head calmly, that's not what I meant. Wanner's heart is not in Jianzong. If Zhang Han goes out to travel, I'm afraid she will follow him. This son has an unlimited future. Following him will be a good thing for Wanner. Hear the words. Li Mubai fell silent immediately, finally understanding what his master meant. After a while, he nodded slowly and said with a smile, disciple, I understand. Being by Zhang Han's side is indeed a rare good thing for junior sister Nangong. In this case, the position of Lord of the 7th peak will be vacant for the time being, and we will make a decision after a suitable candidate is found. That's fine. The girl didn't say anything more on this matter. She was no longer the leader of the sect, so she didn't need to worry about these trivial matters. There is one more thing. You also know the situation of being a teacher, and now there is not much time left. You should improve your education as soon as possible. Quote. Her tone was very calm, as if she was telling something that had nothing to do with her. Master. Li Mubai's eyes trembled, isn't martial saint's cultivation useless? It's destiny. The girl shook her head, her voice was childish, but it contained a deep sense of vicissitudes of life. Her figure gradually disappeared into the hall, leaving only a faint sigh that echoed endlessly. You are already an old man when you were born, and your destiny is not controlled by you at all. Iron Sword Gate. One of the 5 major sects in Dongguan, all disciples in the sect carry a pure black épée, making them very recognizable. This is also the biggest difference from Jianzong. Although both sects specialize in swordsmanship, Sword Sect looks more fairy-like, while Iron Sword Gate is filled with a barbaric and fierce atmosphere. In other words, it is the difference between Sword Immortal and Sword Demon. At this time, Zhang Han and his party have arrived outside the Iron Sword Gate. It is not located on a mountain like Jianzong, but a plain, surrounded by high iron fences, and the entrance is a pure black door, which gives people a sense of depression. Standing here, you can vaguely see a sword energy rising into the sky within the Iron Sword Gate. It is not sharp, but has a heavy feeling. Who is coming? Seeing them, the 2 disciples guarding the gate immediately stepped forward and spoke in a deep voice. Zhang Han, the master of the 9th peak of the Sword Sect, and Zhang Yi, the true disciple of the master of the Sword Sect, are here to visit. Zhang Han said with a calm expression. Peak master of Sword Sect. The 2 disciples looked at them for a few times, their eyes, Zero Sansan, especially lingering on Zhang Han, and then they looked at each other, not daring to neglect, and immediately sent one person in to report. Another disciple said, Guys, wait a moment. Zhang Han nodded slightly. Not long after, the disciple who went in to report came out. He looked at Zhang Han and said, "Guys, please follow me." Following this disciple, Zhang Han and others soon arrived at a large hall. The decoration looked very old-fashioned, and the walls were gray-black and seemed to be made of fine iron. This is extremely rare. Every palace and house in the sword sect is basically made of carved stones, but the iron sword gate seems to be made of fine iron everywhere, giving it a sense of heaviness. In the main hall, there was an old man in black sitting. Seeing Zhang Han and others walking in, the old man held a cup of tea and said with a smile, "I have long heard that the ninth peak of the sword sect has a new peak master. When we see it today, it turns out that a hero is born. Please sit down." Fellow Taoist received the award. Zhang Han sat down safely and said with a smile, "Qingluan, Yi, haven't you met your senior yet?" Zhang Yi, the true disciple of the master of the sword sect, has met his senior. Yi Qingluan, a true disciple of the ninth peak of the sword sect and the Yi family of Zhongzhou, has met his senior. Zhang Yi and Yi Qingluan spoke one after another, neither humble nor overbearing. Okay, they are all young geniuses." The old man lowered his head and took a sip of tea with a smile. Suddenly, he made a movement and all the tea in his mouth spurted out. He suddenly raised his head and looked at Yi Qingluan in shock. "Are you from the Yi family in Zhongzhou?" "Yes," Yi Qingluan said lightly. This is what master asked her to say so as not to make things difficult for her. The old man couldn't sit still. He looked at Yi Qingluan steadily, doubtful. There shouldn't be anyone pretending to be a member of the Yi family in Zhongzhou. To be precise, even if someone does, it's impossible to pretend to be Jianzong. After all, the 5 major sects of the eastern wilderness are all more or less related to the forces of Zhongzhou. Who dares to do this unless he eats the courage of a bear and a leopard? Not to mention, since the other party came with the 9th peak master of Jianzong, it means that Jianzong has determined the identity of the other party, and he is indeed from the extremely powerful Yi family in Zhongzhou. The face of the old man in black changed for a moment, then returned to normal, and said with a smile, "It turns out she is the young lady of the Yi family in Zhongzhou. You are neglecting me, you are neglecting me. When someone comes, they still don't get a VIP seat for Miss Yi. Bring me fruits." "No need," Yi Qingluan said softly. "How can I sit down when the master is here? I can just stand." Hear the words. The eyes of the old man in black twitched. What he just said was originally meant to be a test. If Yi Qingluan didn't speak and simply sat down, it meant that she didn't care much about Jianzong. But when she said this, she obviously meant respect for Zhang. This should be treated with caution. The old man in black straightened his face, looked at Zhang Han, and said, "Fellow Taoist came to our sword sect today, probably not just for a visit, right?" "Good." Zhang Han nodded, pointed at Zhang Yi, and said, "She is the true disciple of the master of my sword sect, and she is also my younger sister. The reason for coming here is actually to observe your sect's Junzong divine sword." Quote. "Oh." The old man in black turned his head and looked at Zhang Yi. After taking a closer look, he sensed carefully, stood up suddenly, and said in a shocked voice, "Innocent sword body." His attention had just been on Yi Qingluan, and he did not pay attention to Zhang Yi. When he saw it, his whole face suddenly changed. Fellow Taoist has a keen eye. Zhang Han smiled softly. The old man in black stared at Zhang Yi with surprise and uncertainty. A long time. He took a deep breath and sighed. Sword sect has really picked up a good disciple. It's a pity that such a peerless physique failed to enter my iron sword gate. It is really a huge pity. Correct. There was a sudden movement in his heart, and he looked at Zhang Han with burning eyes. "Fellow Taoist, can you let her try to activate my town level divine sword? There is nothing you can't do." Zhang Han nodded as usual. He naturally knew what the old man meant. If Zhang Yi could shake that divine sword, he would naturally become the saintess of the Iron Sword Gate. In a certain respect, he could also be regarded as a member of the Iron Sword Gate. Good. The sword intent in the eyes of the old man in black was concentrated. "Fellow Taoist, follow me." "Say it." He strode towards the outside of the palace. Zhang Han chuckled in his heart and followed with his 2 girls. It seems that even if Yi Qingluan is not brought here today, Iron Sword Gate still welcomes Zhang Yi to observe the divine sword and try to pull it out. He still underestimated the temptation of an innocent sword body. I'm afraid, any sword Dao Sect would like to have Wugo's sword body worship the sect, right? After a while, they came to a vast square where many Iron Sword Gate disciples gathered. They gathered around and tried to pull out the pure black iron sword in the center one after another. Hey, failed again. Nonsense. You still want to pull out the divine sword like this? Hey, here's the picture. The disciples were talking about each other and suddenly gave way. They looked at Zhang Han and others who were walking behind the old man in black, their eyes full of curiosity. Are those three people from the Sword Sect? Obviously, the clothes on his body have the logo of the Sword Sect. There seems to be another elder of the Sword Sect. What a nice view. Almost everyone's eyes fell on Yi Qingluan. She stands out like a chicken, with a superb temperament, as light as water with a hint of charm, a graceful figure, a face as jade, like a crescent moon, like flowers and trees piled with snow, tender and graceful, delicate and graceful, and extremely beautiful. The little girl next to her is no less delicate than her, but she is still too young and has not grown. It's him. In the crowd, a petite girl stared at Zhang Han and murmured, "Why did he come to Iron Sword Gate? Could it be that he wanted to draw his sword?" She is the Iron Sword Gate path that Zhang Han had seen before in the Emperor's tomb. A girl without three things. I've met the elder. When the man who was drawing the sword saw the elder approaching, he quickly let go of his hand and saluted the old man in black. Kindness. The old man in black nodded casually, then turned to look at Zhang Yi, smiled and said, "Little girl, please. Do you want to observe first, or start drawing the sword directly?" All the disciples around looked surprised. This elder is known as the cold-faced king of hell, but now he would smile at a disciple of the Sword Sect, which is really surprising. What made the disciples at Iron Sword Gate speechless was that this little girl of 7 or 8 years old was also here to draw the sword, which was a bit ridiculous. If such a young child could pull out the sword, they would be ashamed to live. "Draw your sword," Zhang Yi said crisply. She stared excitedly at the iron sword stuck on the ground, as if she had seen some fun toy. She swayed and appeared next to the iron sword. She grasped the hilt of the sword with both hands and shouted. Ha! Next moment, boom, the pure black iron sword trembled slightly, and a thick black sword shadow suddenly rose into the sky, swinging away the layers of white clouds above the sky, standing between heaven and earth. There was a sudden silence all around, and you could hear a needle drop. The thick sword intent swept across all directions, and everyone was stunned, staring at Zhang Yi's small body. TTE. Did it really shake the divine sword? Among the people present, only Zhang Han and Yi Qingluan were calm. Especially the latter. She couldn't understand the power of Wu Guo's sword very well. After all, she had been defeated at the opponent's hands, and her memory was extremely profound. To know, although Yi Qingluan did not awaken the Qingluan bloodline in his previous life, he can still be called a genius of the previous generation. There are few people in the same realm who can rival him, but he was defeated by the blood-clothed empress with one sword. But, in his memory, the sword Zhang Yi later held was not this black épée. Shocked, the old man in black got excited and pulled off 2 strands of his beard. At this moment, one after another figures flew through the air and landed next to the old man. They were all elders of the Iron Sword Gate. Everyone, including the gate master, stared at Zhang Yi, who was still trying to draw his sword. "Old Li, who is this?" The iron sword was actually shaken. "What is the origin of this little girl? God bless me, Iron Sword Gate." All the elders were extremely excited. Etc. Suddenly, an elder's eyes twitched, staring at the purple rapier mark on Zhang Yi's clothes, and said in a hoarse voice, "She is from the Sword Sect." Yes, the old man in black smiled bitterly and said, "She is a disciple of the master of the Sword Sect. She is called Zhang Yi, which means Wugo's sword body." Hear the words. Only then did everyone notice that the little girl was the legendary Wugo's sword body. They were all too excited just now and didn't take a closer look. Now that they saw clearly, their eyes were all shining, and they wanted to cover Zhang Yi immediately. "What a pity, what a pity." An elder with a clean face sighed sadly. "The Wushu sword body, which is rare in 10,000 years, failed to be accepted into my Iron Sword Gate sect and became a disciple of the Sword Sect. It's heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. How about forcing her to stay and promising huge profits?" said an elder. Absolutely not. The old man in black's eyebrows twitched, and he quickly sent a message. Brothers, have you seen that young man? The master of Iron Sword Gate glanced at Zhang Han, with a slightly strange look on his face, and said, I have met him once. He must be Zhang Han, the master of the 9th peak of the Sword Sect. The inheritance in the Emperor's tomb at that time was passed down by him. Proceeds. It turns out that he is the 9th peak master of Sword Sect. All the elders looked at it one after another. Iron Sword Gate and Jianzong have been fighting openly and secretly, so they naturally know very well about Jianzong's new peak master. What happened in Sword Sect yesterday was temporarily blocked, and Iron Sword Gate has not received the news yet, otherwise I am afraid that Zhang Han would look at him completely differently than he does now. Did you see that person next to him? The elder in black transmitted the message again. I saw it. An elder glanced at Yi Qingluan, with a flash of surprise in his eyes. She is very beautiful, but is there anything else special about her? She is from the Yi family in Zhongzhou. The tone of the elder in black became extremely serious, and he said in a deep voice, she joined the Zhanzong and is a disciple of Zhang Han. We have not received any news before. I am afraid that the Zhanzong deliberately concealed it. The elders suddenly changed their colors. The name of the Yi family in Zhongzhou is like thunder. Although they are far away and they don't usually have any interactions with each other, they would definitely not dare to offend them. Moreover, judging from her attitude towards Zhang Han, she should have a lot of respect for her as a master, and Wugo Sword Body is Zhang Han's sister, so she must not have any bad thoughts. The elder in black warned seriously. After a pause, he transmitted the message again and said, however, I suspect that her target should be the Wugo Sword Body. How can we defeat the Yi family in Zhongzhou? Everyone was silent. The sound transmission speed of spiritual thoughts is extremely fast, and many thoughts flash through, but it only takes a short moment. At this time, Zhang Yi was still trying hard to draw the sword. She was so suppressed that her face turned red. The black iron sword trembled slightly, and the thick sword intent swept through the sky, but it seemed to have taken root and could not be pulled out no matter what. Are you going to give up so easily? An elder said with some reluctance, this is the Wugo Sword Body. Not to mention other things, in terms of swordsmanship, it is definitely the strongest physique, bar none. No, the Lord of Iron Sword Gate shook his head slightly. He is a sturdy middle-aged man, carrying a huge black iron sword behind his back. It is naturally impossible to retain the Wuji Yu Sword Body. Even if there is no such person in Zhongzhou, it is impossible. If we force him to stay, it will definitely lead to a war with Jianzong, and it will be a full-scale war. We cannot afford such a price. But there is a way to create an inseparable connection between the Wushu Sword Body and my Iron Sword Gate. The voice of the Lord of Iron Sword Gate sounded in the ears of every elder. What the sect master means is. The old man in black felt a slight movement in his heart. Saintess. The Lord of Iron Sword Gate stared at Zhang Yi and said, her future is limitless and she must soar to the 9 heavens. She cannot stay at Iron Sword Gate or stay in Sword Sect. Only Zhongzhou is her real battlefield. What we need to do is to make her the saintess of our Iron Sword Gate. In this way, our Iron Sword Gate will naturally become famous and attract more and more geniuses. After hearing this, all the elders were thoughtful. The master of Iron Sword Gate's idea is very simple. Since he can't keep the Wushu Sword Body, he will bet on her future. He doesn't need the Wushu Sword Body to stay at the Iron Sword Gate. He only needs to let the world know that the Wushu Sword Body is the saintess of the Iron Sword Gate. Then naturally, the geniuses from the 5 major states will become famous. But, an elder hesitated and said, it seems like she can't get up. Although Zhang Yi shook the black iron sword, the iron sword was not pulled out and was still firmly inserted into the ground. No need to pull it out. A strange color flashed in the Iron Sword Gate master's eyes. Since the birth of Iron Sword Gate, this iron sword has been inserted here. Let alone pulling it out, there is no one who can shake it. What's more, it's not that Wu Guo's sword body cannot be pulled out. She has clearly been recognized by Divine Sword, and Divine Sword also wants to be born, but... His expression became extremely strange. She's not strong enough, so she can't move. Can't pull it out. Everyone's expressions suddenly became extremely exciting. On the side, Zhang Han watched Zhang Yi draw his sword quietly, the corner of his mouth twitching slightly. Obviously he also discovered this. The dark heavy sword was trembling. It had clearly recognized Zhang Yi and wanted to be born, but it was stunned because Zhang Yi was not strong enough to pull it out. One can imagine. The divine sword has spirit, and I'm afraid it's also very depressing. I have been buried here for who knows how many years. I finally found an owner who could appreciate me. I thought I could finally see the light of day again, but it turned out that I couldn't get out because of my strength. Putting yourself in his shoes, if Zhang Han were that sword, he would be very speechless. But how much does it weigh? Zhang Han's eyes flashed slightly. Although Zhang Yi is young, her strength is not small. She is still in the realm of martial arts. Even though she is not good at strength, she can easily lift several kilograms of electric cloth if she uses her spiritual power. But I can't even pull out this black sword. Detection. Zhang Han said something silently in his heart. Detecting. Testing completed. The Yuan Tu sword, sealed by the black iron divine gold, is a remnant of the ancient great power. It kills people without any trace of cause and effect. The divine sword has a spirit and can choose its master by itself. Zhang Yi has recognized the Wugo sword body, but it is unable to pull it out because of its lack of strength. Nothing in return. Closing square bracket. Yuan Tu sword. The corners of Zhang Han's eyes twitched. The Yuan Tu sword among the two swords of Yuan Tu Abbey. This is a treasure that is not weaker than the immortal executing sword. Unexpectedly, it is intact, but it is sealed here. Its original form should not be pure black, nor is it so. It's just that the outer layer is wrapped with a layer of dark iron divine gold. No wonder no one can pull it out. Getting its recognition is not that simple. Just as Zhang Han guessed, Zhang Yi had been recognized by Yuan Tujian, but he was not strong enough to pull it out. Can't pull it out. Zhang Yi finally gave up. She was dejected, looking very defeated, with a look of distress on her face, and beads of sweat covering her smooth forehead. No. Zhang Han smiled and touched her little head. Actually, this sword has recognized you, and it has figured it out, but you are not strong enough. You are not the only one who is depressed, it is also depressed. Yuan Tujian trembled slightly, as if agreeing with his words. Ah! Zhang Yi opened her eyes wide. Yi Qingluan couldn't help laughing. His eyebrows were full of smiles. He didn't expect that it would be such a result in the end. Yes. At this time, the master of the Iron Sword Gate also smiled and said, "The divine sword has approved the Wugo sword body, but its weight is extraordinary. You may not be able to pull it out in a short time." His voice changed. "How about this? You serve as the saintess of my Iron Sword Gate. From now on, as long as you think you have the ability, you can come and try to take away this sword at any time. How about that?" Saintess. Zhang Yi blinked and raised his head to look at Zhang Han. Can. Zhang Han took a deep look at the Iron Sword Gate master. Naturally, he knew what the other party meant. He just wanted to use Zhang Yiwuguo's reputation as a sword body to attract more disciples. However, Zhang Yi did not successfully pull out the Yuan Tu sword at this time, so naturally a large part of the people who come here in admiration will come for this sword. Presumably, starting today, the Iron Sword Gate rule that everyone can draw the sword will be changed. As for what it will be changed to, Zhang Han naturally doesn't know and can't guess it, but it must be a new rule that is conducive to the development of Iron Sword Gate. However, there are requirements. Zhang Han said with a calm expression. Speaking, the master of Iron Sword Gate nodded. After all, Zhang Han is not a fool. It is not easy to take advantage of the situation without paying a certain price. It is simply impossible. First, the identity of Zhang Yiwugu's sword body cannot be announced now. Zhang Han said lightly. Good. The master of Iron Sword Gate agreed immediately. He is not stupid. The consequences of announcing it now will only make other states' swordsmen focus on Zhang Yi. The gain outweighs the loss. Second, a flash of light flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. Saintess must not only have the name of saintess, but also have the power of saintess. Hear the words. The Iron Sword Gate master frowned slightly. He pondered for a while, then quickly made up his mind, and said in a deep voice, "Yes. According to the teachings of our ancestors, the power of saintess can even be higher than that of the sect master. As long as what saintess says is not harmful to Iron Sword Gate, it is okay." Quote. Master. The expressions of the elders changed. I have made up my mind, no need to say more. The master of Iron Sword Gate waved his hand, his tone unquestionable. Those elders looked at me and I looked at you. In the end, they could only remain silent, not knowing what they were thinking. Third, Zhang Han smiled and said, you must not interfere with any of Saint's actions. No problem. The master of Iron Sword Gate is obviously also a werewolf, a little more ruthless than a werewolf, and he did these things in the blink of an eye that can affect the entire Iron Sword Gate situation. This is a huge gamble. Use the Iron Sword Gate's future, Yi's Weishi. If Zhang Yi can grow up, then Iron Sword Gate will naturally benefit from her light and develop rapidly. If not, not much is lost. Very good. Zhang Han touched Zhang Yi's head and said with a smile, Yi, you can understand this sword. Yeah, Zhang Yi nodded vigorously. After knowing that it was not her lack of ability that prevented the Black Épée from claiming its master, but her lack of strength, she obviously no longer felt as disappointed as before. After all, lack of ability cannot be compensated, but strength can be gained through practice. The shadow of a broken sword appeared behind Zhang Yi. She stared seriously at the heavy black sword stuck on the ground. Not long after, a black sword shadow slowly appeared behind her, standing side by side with the broken martial soul sword shadow. Angai, the Iron Sword Gate Master's pupils shrank. As we all know, the stronger the martial spirit, the closer it will be to the middle when it emerges. The Black Épée is Iron Sword Gate's divine sword. No one has been able to pull it out for so many years, and no one has even been able to successfully observe it and turn it into their own martial spirit. There is no doubt about its power. The master of Iron Sword Gate was not surprised at all that Zhang Yi was able to observe successfully. But what surprised him was that the Junzong divine sword could not be located in the center, but stood side by side with the broken sword shadow. When did the Sword Sect have such a sword? A broken sword can actually appear side by side with the Zongzong divine sword that no one has been able to pull out in Iron Sword Gate for countless thousands of years. You can imagine the shock in the heart of the Iron Sword Gate master. Sword Sect. His eyes narrowed. With the existence of Zhang Yi, there will undoubtedly be an additional link between Jianzong and Iron Sword Gate in the future. Although there will still be competition, it will not be as severe as before. This is also one of the purposes of the Iron Sword Gate Master. A few days ago, an ancestor came back from traveling and warned him to prepare for a big help. And this catastrophe may sweep across the entire eastern wilderness. At this time, Zhang Yi has finished observing. Yuan Tujian has recognized her, and observing her is as easy as drinking water. Zhang Han next to him was a little confused. He was hesitating whether to use Yuan Tu's sword as his martial spirit, but after thinking about it, he gave up. Although the Yuan Tu sword is strong, it is not stronger than the Immortal Execution sword formation. Not to mention, Zhang Han really doesn't plan to have two swords as martial arts spirits, unless they can be combined into one like the Immortal Executing sword and the Immortal Executing sword. Otherwise, having an extra sword would not be a big improvement for someone like him who is not specialized in swordsmanship. Guys, stay put. Seeing that Zhang Han seemed to be preparing to leave, the master of Iron Sword Gate quickly said, although Saint is established, she still needs a ceremony. Please stay a moment and let Iron Sword Gate fulfill its duty as a landlord. That's fine. Zhang Han thought for a moment and did not refute his face. Naturally, there was a big banquet next. All the elders of Iron Sword Gate were present and congratulated Zhang Yi. Finally, there was a simple ceremony to establish saintess. After a feast of wine and food, Zhang Han and others said goodbye and left. Leaving the Iron Sword Gate, Zhang Yi frowned and said in confusion, "Brother, why did Iron Sword Gate make me their saintess so easily? I am a disciple of the Master of Sword Sect. Aren't they afraid that I will merge Iron Sword Gate into Sword Sect?" "Of course I'm not afraid." On the side, Yi Qingluan explained with a smile, Iron Sword Gate has been inherited for I don't know how many years, and it has a profound foundation. Although you are a saintess, theoretically you have even higher power than the sect master, but don't forget, they also have the Supreme Elder. Those Supreme Elders will naturally not confirm that Iron Sword Gate will be annexed by the Sword Sect. Your orders are useless to them. So that's it. Chef. Zhang Yi suddenly realized. Although she is talented and intelligent, She is still young and has not experienced enough things. Yi Qingluan had a high level of cultivation in his previous life and could see the warmth and coldness of people, so he could easily figure out Iron Sword Gate's plan. Then what's the point of this saintess? Zhang Yi curled her lips. Zhang Han smiled lightly and said nothing. The Yuan Tu sword and the Immortal Executing Sword are treasures of the same level, and the Iron Sword Gate has used the Yuan Tu sword as a template to forge disciple weapons throughout the ages. The entire sect has unified standards, and the difference is only in grade. Over time, Yuan Tu sword gained a little more. The power of faith. Iron Sword Gate enshrines it as a divine sword. Everyone's sword is made based on the template of Yuan Tu sword, and even the skills are customized. Therefore, Yuan Tu sword is the sword of the Lord among all the swords of Iron Sword Gate. The one who masters the Yuan Tu sword is the sword master. When Zhang Yi pulls out the Yuan Tu sword, it will be up to them whether Iron Sword Gate wants to obey her orders or not. Correct, Zhang Han suddenly said. Get ready when you get back. Let's go on a long trip. Good. Zhang Yi nodded quickly. Why don't you ask where you are going? Zhang Han laughed. You can go anywhere. I'm tired of staying in Zhanzong. It's so boring. And besides, as long as my brother is around, isn't it the same wherever I go? Zhang Yi's big eyes narrowed and turned into crescents. Yi Qingluan lowered his head and said nothing. This moment, she was vaguely aware of the difference between herself and Zhang Yi. She worshipped Zhang Han as her teacher, firstly for her spiritual practice, and secondly because of her respect for the imperial master. However, Zhang Yi's thoughts were very simple. All she could think about was her dependence on Zhang Han. Qingluan, do you want to go? Zhang Han turned around and asked. If master agrees, this disciple will naturally want to follow you. Yi Qingluan raised his beautiful eyes and said softly, with a hint of hope in his eyes. Then follow. Zhang Han thought for a while and nodded slightly. However, although Yi Qingluan is said to be a disciple of the Sword Sect, after all, his time in the Sword Sect is very short, and he only has a very weak Immortal Executing Sword aura, so he may not be recognized by the tomb of Tongtian. But it didn't matter. The most she could do was not let her get close to the whole body. Yes, Zhang Han's trip is to prepare for the Blade of Heaven. In fact, he currently has 2 places to go and one he cannot fly to. One of them is the tomb of Tongtian. There must be a huge opportunity hidden there. If the prediction is correct, the corpse that Nangong Wan and the others saw at the beginning should be the leader of Tongtian. The second is the place where the sun sets. But listening to what Yi Qingluan said, Zitu was quite strange. Although Zhang Han didn't care much in his words, he was still very wary in his heart. If I can get another chance at the tomb of Tongtian, it's not too late to go. Certainly, there is another big reason for choosing tomb of Tongtian instead of Zitu. That is, even if the 9 nether mysterious water is obtained in the western land, kill with sword, and essence and blood of the Emperor River, cannot be used in a short period of time. The former requires 9 nether mysterious water, and the latter requires listening to fairy music. Zhang Han also roughly understood why the 9 yang true fire and listening to immortal songs were needed to integrate Emperor Yang's essence and blood. The Chinese Book of Mountain and Sea says, 350 miles to the west is called Tianshan Mountain, with many gold and jade, some green and real yellow. Yingshui flows out of Yan, and flows into Tang Valley from the southwest. There is a god, whose shape is like a yellow sack, red like red fire, with 6 legs and 4 wings, and a faceless body. It knows singing and dancing, and is actually the Emperor River. Some of Tanggu is the place where the sun rises in mythical legend, opposite Yuan where the sun sets. This can explain why the 9 yang true fire is needed to melt the essence and blood. The following description shows that Di Zhong likes to listen to music and learn to dance. Therefore, the purpose of listening to fairy music is probably to make the blood essence active so that it can be better absorbed. To listen to fairy music, you need to go to Zhongzhou. And as Yi Qingluan said, the Celestial Melody Pavilion may not really be able to play the music that is recognized by the system as fairy music. After much deliberation, Zhang Han decided to look for the tomb of Tongtian first. Return to Zhanzong. After listening to Zhang Han's words, Nangong Wan agreed, okay. But when will we set off? Not urgent. Zhang Han thought for a while and asked, have you decided whether to find a new body or switch to Ghost Dao? Fix Ghost Dao. Nangong Wan's voice was still as gentle as before, and she whispered. With Master's temperament, if she were to find a physical body again, she would immediately go out and kill someone, and I have been in the spirit body for a long time, and it seems that it would be quite interesting to switch to Ghost Dao. Kill one now. Zhang Han's mouth twitched slightly. After thinking about the character of the female devil, Zhang Han had to admit that she might really do this. You have to think about it. Zhang Han stared at Nangong Wan. Think about it. Nangong Wan laughed softly. Besides, while you were going to Iron Sword Gate, I had already told Master that Ghost Dao's skills were coming and I had already started practicing. All right. Zhang Han shrugged. This Nangong Wan was decisive enough and made a decision in a vigorous and resolute manner. No wonder he was able to become the leader of the Ninth Peak back then. He was also an extremely powerful character. The reason why her body was destroyed was because she believed in Ji Yulingyun too much. She didn't expect that the person she grew up with would kill her. In this case, we can set off today. Zhang Han didn't want to delay any longer. He has been in the Wuhan realm for several months and has a good foundation, but he has been unable to break through because he does not have a Wuhan. If you go to the tomb of Tongtian, you should gain something. You want to leave Heavenly Sword Mountain. Li Mubai looked at Zhang Han in astonishment. Although he knew that Zhang Han would leave Zhanzong sooner or later, he never expected that it would be so soon. Good. Zhang Han nodded calmly and said, both Yi and I have been limited in our breakthroughs. I forgot to tell you that Yi has successfully observed the Iron Sword Gate's Zhanzong Divine Sword and became the Iron Sword Gate Holy Sword. Wow. Li Mubai stood up suddenly, knocked over the table next to him, and spilled tea on the floor. Really? He looked excited. How can it be false? Zhang Han picked up a cup of tea, took a sip, frowned, and put it aside. Recently, I have been accustomed to drinking good tea brought from the Emperor's tomb. When I drank this, I suddenly felt the astringent taste in my mouth. It was not of the same level at all. It was simply difficult to drink. Good. Li Mubai put his hands on his hands and laughed, his face flushed. That old guy has been fighting with me all his life, but now he doesn't want my disciple to become the saintess of his entire sect. Ha 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 ha. He has really been fighting with the master of Iron Sword Gate his whole life. The two of them disliked each other when they were young, and each was a proud figure of the Sword Sect and Iron Sword Gate, so they would fight at every turn, and the outcome was always evenly divided. Correct. Li Mubai looked at Zhang Han and asked, did Yi pull out that sword? No. Zhang Han shook his head, just shake it. The divine sword wants to be born, but Yi is not strong enough to pull it out completely. We can only wait until later. Can this still happen? Li Mubai was stunned. I can't draw the sword because I'm not strong enough, which really makes people don't know what to say. Suddenly, he frowned slightly and said to himself, that's not right. If that's the case, why would the old guy let Zhang Yi live with his daughter? This does not include the rules of Iron Sword Gate. Wait. The corners of Li Mubai's eyes twitched slightly. That thing isn't trying to take advantage of the situation, is it? After all, he is the master of a sect, and he will subconsciously think in this direction when considering things. In addition, he and the master of Iron Sword Gate already know the basics, and he can guess the other party's plan in an instant. Rot. Absolutely. After thinking about it carefully, Li Mubai puffed his beard and glared. The old man is really not a guy who will suffer losses. Borrow me as a disciple to promote his Iron Sword Gate. What a 10-round abacus. Okay, take it easy. Zhang Han stood up and walked out of the hall slowly. I'm ready to withdraw. Wait a minute. Li Mubai thought for a while, took out 3 jade talismans from the storage space, and said seriously, these are the jade talismans that Master gave me. Each one has the power of martial saint. Take it with you and protect your clothes. The activation method is very simple. You only need to instill spiritual power and recite a mantra. Urgency is like a law and order to forgive. Thank you, Master. Zhang Han's eyes lit up and he accepted it unceremoniously. By the way, there are some creatures transformed by spirit medicine at my 9th peak. If you need anything, just go find them directly. I'll say it. Quote. Good. Li Mubai nodded. He naturally knew that Zhang Han brought out a bunch of extremely old spirit medicine from the Emperor's tomb. However, unless he is injured, those spirit medicines are usually of little significance to him. At the level of martial venerable, relying on external objects will basically have no improvement effect. Senior has left. Zhang Han looked at the 3 jade charms in his hand and asked casually. Gone. Li Mubai sighed softly, with a hint of deep sadness in his eyes, but it passed away in a flash and was not noticed by Zhang Han. Master, she likes to travel around the world and does not want to stay in the sect. Inside. Well, Zhang Han nodded, looked at the jade talisman in his hand, and said silently, test. Under detection. Testing completed. The Taishang Dao talisman was carefully crafted by the previous master of the Sword Sect, and it was engraved with the crude supreme Dao pattern of the ancient heavenly venerable. After use, you can get rewards. Incarnation of martial saint, lasts for a quarter of an hour. Death. Taishang Daoist talisman. Zhang Han's pupils contracted slightly. To activate this jade talisman, the mantra that needs to be recited is, urgency is like a law, pardon. When he thought about Master Li Mubai again, an incredible idea came to his mind. When she first appeared, she was an octogenarian. The corners of Zhang Han's eyes twitched. It is said that when a girl first appeared in the eyes of the world, she was very old. Every year thereafter, she lost 1 year of age, and now she has become a child of about 6 years old. This reminded Zhang Han of a legend about an ancient Chinese. According to legend, Lao Su is the embodiment of moral heavenly venerable, that is, Taishang Laojun. He was born with white eyebrows and white hair, and also had a white beard, because his mother was pregnant with him for 81 years. 920. And because his mother ate a plum to become pregnant, she gave him the surname, Li, and because of his huge ears, he was named Li Dan. And just now, Zhang Han checked the information about this jade talisman. Its name is called Taishang Dao Talisman. There is also an ancient heavenly venerable Dao pattern in it. Although it is extremely crude, it is still extraordinary. It can actually turn into a martial saint incarnation and last for a full quarter of an hour. What is Taishang Laojun's unique skill? 1 Qi transforms into 3 purities. Coupled with the rumor that the girl first appeared as an old man, it was difficult for Zhang Han not to connect the two. An octogenarian means 80 years old. However, there is one biggest difference. Zhang Han thought in his mind, Taishang Laojun is a man, but the girl is clearly a woman. Therefore, she can only be said to have some relationship with Laojun, but she is by no means the incarnation of Laojun. It's a pity that she has already left, so I can't ask more clearly. What's wrong? Seeing Zhang Han lowering his eyes and saying nothing, Li Mubai couldn't help but ask. Fine. Zhang Han came back to his senses, shook his head, stopped thinking about it, turned around and turned into a sword light and left the hall. Falling on the 9th peak. At this time, everyone has finished packing. In fact, there is nothing that needs to be packed. Everything that can be taken has been put into the storage space. After all, practitioners are different from ordinary people. Food and other things can be found casually on the road. Sister Yao Yao, are you going too? Zhang Han raised his eyebrows and looked at the world tree rising from the ground. No. Tang Yao Yao turned into a small green seedling, as if a seed had just sprouted, and landed lightly on Zhang Yi's head. At first glance, it looked like a decoration. Okay, of course. Zhang Han's eyes were a little strange. He thought that World Tree would be more willing to take root here. After all, the original agreement was to bring it out instead of running around with it. After all, if you are by your side all the time, wouldn't it be like a free thug? Since it is willing to follow, Zhang Han is naturally happy. Then, let's go. Zhang Han casually threw it into the air. Boom! A huge ship appeared across the sky, and he jumped up and landed on the deck. This is Feizhou, and it is also the relic of Xiaoyao Martial Emperor. Her ring contains various interesting objects, which shows that she must have been a person who knew how to enjoy things during her lifetime. Followed by Yi Qingluan and Zhang Yi also jumped up. The little rock is now a little bigger than before. It spreads its wings and lands on the top of the flying boat. It holds its head high and looks high-spirited. As for Nangong Wan, she still stayed in the light blue pendant, worn by Zhang Yi. Where are Uncle Zhang and the others? Zhang Han looked around and asked. The words just fell. Whoosh! Uncle Zhang's figure fell on the deck. His aura at this time was obviously more ethereal than before. Standing there, it was like an illusion, making it difficult for people to notice his presence. Seeing this, Yi Qingluan was surprised and said, Uncle Zhang, has your cultivation level improved? Yes, miss. With a smile on his face, Uncle Zhang glanced at Zhang Han and said, I would like to thank Mr. Zhang for his guidance on this matter. If it weren't for him, I might not be able to make progress in this life. Yi Qingluan nodded gently. Others might think this was Uncle Zhang's self-effacing remarks, but she knew clearly that what Uncle Zhang said was true. If it weren't for his master's guidance, he wouldn't have improved at all for the rest of his life. Until death, there is no change. You're welcome. Zhang Han smiled, then looked at the pendant in front of Zhang Yi's neck. Nangong, where should we go? Now that Ji Yu Lingyan is dead, Nangong Wan is the only one who knows the address of Tongtian Tomb, unless there is someone else in the world who can luckily walk into that fog. Buzz. Nangong Wan floated out. Her body is filled with a faint yin energy, which is slightly different from just the primordial spirit state. Although the primordial spirit state looks exactly the same as now, there is still a kind of spiritual energy permeating the air, but at this moment all the spiritual energy has disappeared and turned into a gloomy ghostly energy. This is the performance of practicing Ghost Dao. Nangong Wan said. That tomb forest is located at the junction of Dongguan and Beiyu. I can't describe the specific location clearly. If you get there, you can recognize the exact location at a glance. Tomb. Hearing this, Yi Qingluan's heart moved slightly. She didn't know what the master was looking for, but at the moment it seemed that it should be a piece of grass. The place where Dongguan and Beiyu meet. Beside, Uncle Zhang suddenly said, Are you sure? Sure. Nangong Wan turned to look at him. A look of surprise flashed in her eyes. Could it be that Senior has also seen that tomb forest? No. Zhang Bofeng frowned and said slowly, however, there has never been any tomb forest at the junction of the Eastern Wilderness and the Northern Territory. If I remember correctly, there should be a city there. Nangong Wan was stunned for a moment and said in astonishment, a city. Good. Uncle Zhang said with determination. I have traveled all over the world, and I have also been to the Eastern Wilderness and the Northern Territory. The junction of the two is a city, with an endless stream of people coming and going, and there is no tomb forest. Hear the words. Zhang Han also frowned, looked at Nangong Wan, and said, Could it be that you remembered it wrong? I don't know. Nangong Wan's face was full of confusion at this time. She had doubts about herself, and murmured. Did I really remember it wrong? But it shouldn't be. When Ji Yu Lingyan and I arrived there, we did see a fog and a forest of steles. There was no city. Zhang Han frowned. Could it be that there is really something wrong with Nangong Wan's memory? Was it that when he left the tomb, he was affected by some mysterious influence and his memory changed? Wrong. Something must be wrong. After pondering for a moment, Zhang Han suddenly said, Nangong, I remember you said before that you left the tomb directly after touching the monument. So what happened after leaving the tomb? Nangong Wan said without hesitation. About 2,000 miles away from the tomb, near there, I was attacked and killed by Ji Yu Lingyan's uncle. Just go there. Zhang Han made a prompt decision with a thought. Boom. The flying boat suddenly burst out with blazing flames, like a cannonball, and rushed towards the North Territory, leaving a long red smoke in the air that did not dissipate for a long time. The speed of the flying boat is extremely fast. But from Zhanzong to the junction of the Eastern Wilderness and the Northern Territory, there is an unknown distance of thousands of miles. Even if flying at this speed, it took a full month to reach the vicinity. Which way to go? Zhang Han controlled the flying boat to stop. That direction. Nangong Wan stretched out her hand and pointed in the direction to the left. She said very firmly, I remember the mountain below. If you walk about 2,000 miles north, you can reach the border. But after I left the tomb, I appeared directly there, about 1,000 miles away from here. Hear the words. Uncle Zhang frowned slightly and said, 2,000 miles to the north, there is indeed a city, not a forest of steles. It seems that there is indeed some kind of problem with your memory. Not necessarily. Zhang Han shook his head gently. Without saying much, he turned the ship's bow and sailed in the direction pointed by Nangong Wan. 1,000 miles is not far, it only takes a cup of tea. The flying boat is suspended in the air, with a dense forest below. Right here. Nangong Wan's eyes lit up and she looked at the dense forest below. I remember correctly indeed. After leaving the big tomb, Ji Yulingyan and I appeared directly in the dense forest. Go down and have a look. Zhang Han put away the flying boat, and everyone fell down quickly. Boom. Zhang Han's feet hit the ground heavily, and he didn't even bother to use buffer measures. He directly resisted with his body. His face was indifferent, and his feet sank deeply into the ground, but he didn't feel any pain at all. Young master's physical body is truly unparalleled. Uncle Zhang landed lightly and praised. He fell straight from the air, and there was no spiritual power surrounding his body. He used pure physical strength to resist the impact of the ground, but he was just like a normal person. It is really shocking that such a powerful and terrifying body could appear in a martial soul monk. There doesn't seem to be anything special about this place. Yi Qingluan also fell to the ground. A faint blue flame flashed in her beautiful eyes. She looked around and said softly, "There are many monsters entrenched nearby, but their realm is not high, and there is no strong yin qi." She looked at Nangong Wan and asked doubtfully, "Are you sure this is here?" "Right here." Nangong Wan nodded seriously. She glanced around, then moved and floated to a tree not far away. She gently touched a mark on the trunk and said with complex eyes, "This is the sword mark one left back then." It is indeed a sword mark left many years ago. Uncle Zhang looked at it carefully and nodded. Although it has been a long time, it still contains the unique sword intent of your sword sect. He was deeply impressed by Jian Zong's sword intent. I can't tell what makes it unique, but it is different from the sword intent of other swords in the Dao sect. For someone with his level of cultivation, he can tell the difference at a glance. It seems my memory is correct. Nangong Wan let out a breath. Along the way, she was very nervous. If her memory had been tampered with unknowingly, it would be too terrifying and terrifying. Zhang Han stared at the sword marks on the tree, and the text message slowly emerged in his mind. Sword mark, left by Nangong Wan 31 years ago. Nothing in return. Closing square bracket. He pondered for a moment. Zhang Han reached out and took out half of the Jijiao steel and found that it had no reaction. Not here. After a while, Zhang Han shook his head and said in a deep voice, "You were indeed teleported here directly, but the tomb is definitely not here. Let's go to the junction of Eastern Wilderness and Northern Territory." Quote. Uncle Zhang muttered, "And I still remember the name of the city, it's Jiaishan City." Snapped. Zhang Han paused. He suddenly turned to look at Uncle Zhang, his eyes burning, and asked slowly, "Uncle Zhang, what do you think the name of that big city is?" "Zhetian City." Uncle Zhang looked at him strangely and said, "Is there anything wrong with this name?" "Big problem." A smile gradually appeared at the corner of Zhang Han's mouth. At this time, he was already certain that the Jiaishan city must have some connection with Tongtian cult master. Otherwise, why would it be called Jiaishan instead of having a bad name? "Let's go." Zhang Han took the lead and walked leisurely towards the border. Everyone quickly followed. After walking for a while, I saw a huge city coming into view. It lay across there, like a giant from ancient times. It was tall and majestic. It could be called a giant city. It's really a city. Nangong Wan was stunned for a moment, full of confusion in the darkness. Could it be that my memory has really been manipulated and everything I encountered back then was an illusion? No, if it is an illusion, how can we explain the broken monument? Why was she killed? Who touched my memory? Nangong Wan fell into chaos. The ghost body that had already solidified slightly fluctuated slightly, and there was an unstable trend, as if it was about to collapse. Nangong. Seeing this, Zhang Han suddenly shouted, forcing Nangong Wan back from his thoughts. "Steady your mind, your memory is not wrong. The huge city in front of you is indeed the location of the forest of steles that you witnessed back then, and it is also where the big tomb is." Nangong Wanmei looked at Zhang Han with confusion in her eyes. Under his serious gaze, the slightly unstable ghost body gradually returned to normal. But, she slowly turned her head, looked at the huge city, and murmured, "That's a city." Zhang Han shook his head. He stared at the huge city and said thoughtfully, "Yes, that is indeed a city, but the forest of steles you saw first is not fake either. They are all there." "What do you mean, Master?" Uncle Zhang was a little confused at this time. He is a semi-saint, so he is naturally sure that his memory will not be tampered with, so he has no doubt about the existence of that city. Aside, Yi Qingluan was thoughtful, but had no words. Zhang Yi, on the other hand, was even more confused, staring at her big watery eyes, not knowing what she was talking about. There was a sapling on her head, which was tender and looked quite happy. I don't know what the idea behind the world tree is, but it actually taken root in her hair. Maybe Zhang Yi has been sitting on its trunk, so now it wants to sit back. Uncle Zhang, you are majoring in space. Could it be that you still can't guess it? Zhang Han said with a smile. What does this have to do with space? Wait, as Zhang Bozheng was speaking, his heart suddenly moved, a flash of inspiration flashed in his mind, and he said in shock. Could the young master mean that the Jiaishan city and the forest of Stells that Miss Nangong saw back then are in the same location, but not in the same space? That's right, Zhang Han laughed and said, so, you two saw it right, you just saw different dimensions. I see, everyone suddenly realized. No wonder Nangong Wan said with confidence that she saw the fog and forest of Stells at the border of the eastern wilderness and the northern territory, but Uncle Zhang said that there was only one city there and no forest of Stells. The question now is, how can we see again the space that Sister Nangong saw back then? Yi Qingluan spoke at the right time and asked the key question. Her beautiful eyes moved like waves in autumn water, and her voice was as ethereal as an oriole said, Sister Nangong, do you still remember, when you came here, was it day or night? Night, Nangong Wan answered without thinking. Even if she forgot everything else, she couldn't forget this incident. After all, it changed her life. Yi Qingluan asked again, what time of night? It should be, ugly time. Nangong Wan thought about it carefully and said, I still remember that night was the new moon, and the moon was like a curved arc. If I remember correctly, the time should be at the beginning of the month. Today seems to be the beginning of the month as well, Uncle Zhang said. That's a coincidence. Zhang Han stretched out lazily and walked slowly towards Jiatian City. Let's go to the city to rest for a while. Everything will be revealed tonight. Hear the words. There was a look of expectation in everyone's eyes. Even Uncle Zhang and Yi Qingluan were not surprised. The former is because he is very interested in being able to enter another space. After all, this is closely related to the way of space he cultivates. Yi Qingluan's idea is simpler. A place that even the Imperial Master is extremely interested in, then, it must be very interesting, right? Jiatian City. Its city walls stretch for an unknown number of miles, spanning plains and several mountains. The giant city is majestic, like a giant from ancient times prostrate on the ground, exuding a simple and vast atmosphere. This city has a history of at least 50,000 years. Uncle Zhang smiled and said, I heard that this city has a long history, so I came here to visit, but in fact it doesn't mean much, it is just older and bigger than other cities. Also, because at the junction of the eastern wilderness and the northern territory, you can see two completely different styles. At this time, Zhang Han and his party have arrived not far from Jiaishan City. People come and go here, and with a little awareness, you can find that they are all practitioners. There is no ordinary person, and everyone exudes the aura of spiritual power, either strong or weak. Just as Uncle Zhang said, pedestrians are largely polarized. Their clothes are either quite thin, or they wear thick fur coats. Those who wear thick clothes are not necessarily from the northern territory, they are more likely to be from the eastern wilderness. Uncle Zhang said with a smile, the climate in the northern territory is cold. After passing through this city, the temperature will drop by at least half, or even lower. Quote, although practitioners are physically stronger than ordinary people, they still wear thick velvet clothes when they come here. They don't use their spiritual power to keep out the cold, so as not to suffer from insufficient spiritual power when encountering certain emergencies, causing oneself to be robbed. Emergencies. Zhang Yi blinked his big eyes and said curiously. The so-called emergency is either encountering robbers or encountering vicious beasts. Zhang Bo explained. Most of the ferocious beasts in the Northern Territory have ice attributes, and fighting in this environment has a great advantage for them. On the contrary, it will be very troublesome for people outside the Northern Territory. As they talked, they walked to the city gate. Zhang Han stopped and raised his eyes to look at the huge plaque hanging on it. The large characters with flying phoenixes showed the heavy atmosphere. Jiatian City. Detection. Zhang Han recited a sentence silently in his heart to Li Jiao. Detecting. Testing completed. Jiaishan City is a huge city that spans between the eastern wilderness and the northern territory. It was built about 80,000 years ago. The city was named after a broken monument discovered by the first-generation city lord. There was only one word, Jia, on the monument, so it was named name. Nothing in return. Closing square bracket. Zhang Han put aside his distracting thoughts and didn't think about anything else, so the system only displayed the information about Jiaishan City without any return. Broken monument. Zhang Han narrowed his eyes slightly. Not surprisingly, that broken monument is probably the upper part of the Jia Jiao monument. No matter who the broken stele belonged to in the past or now, since Zhang Han is here now, the half-sided stele with the word Jia written on it will only belong to him in the future. He wanted to know what would happen if the Jijiao monument was put together completely. I just don't know where the half of the ruined monument is. Zhang Han stepped into Jiaishan City and once again felt the majesty of this giant city. Looking at it, the buildings in the city all have a barbaric and ancient atmosphere. They are basically made of huge rocks, covered with traces of wind and rain, and even sword and axe marks, and the artistic conception is confused. There are vendors on both sides of the road, and the sound of selling is endless, noisy and lively. And their group instantly attracted a lot of attention. Zhang Han himself is handsome and unrestrained. Beside him is Yi Qingluan, who is elegant and unrivaled. He also holds a little Lolita with bright big eyes in his hand. In addition, he is followed by 10 old men who are old but have extraordinary bearing. No matter how you look at it, it looks like the children of a big family are traveling. Wow, this city is bigger than our sword sect. Zhang Yi was very excited, her big eyes were shining, and she pulled Yi Qingluan to look left and right. The two girls now have a very good relationship. Because Yi Qingluan made big moves and had a fierce, money offensive, and when chatting, he called her Little Master Uncle, which made her happy easily let Yi treat her. Zhang Han looked at it with a smile. Zhang Yi has been living on the streets since she was a child, lonely and helpless. But no matter how much she has experienced the ups and downs of human relationships, is still just a child after all. She is only 8 years old this year, so she naturally has the innocent and playful nature of a child. When I was in Zhongzhou, I almost never saw a young lady smiling so happily. Uncle Zhang stood aside and said softly, "Hear the words." A strange color appeared in Zhang Han's eyes. He stared at Yi Qingluan, who was holding Zhang Yi's little hand and smiling like a flower, and suddenly asked, "Uncle Zhang, what kind of person is Qingluan usually?" "What kind of person?" Uncle Zhang's eyes showed some memories, and he said slowly. On the day the young lady was born, a strange phenomenon appeared in the sky, and hundreds of birds surrounded the house. The old family leader said that this was the blessing of the ancestors, so from that moment on, she was shrouded in the light of Wei Kai. When she was 3 years old, she was officially tested for qualifications and was awarded the saint grade. She was blessed with all kinds of honors. When the young lady came into contact with spiritual practice for the first time when she was 6 years old, she immediately showed her unparalleled understanding. She understood it thoroughly just by reading the Yi family's ancestral exercises once. When I was 10 years old, the young lady took the initiative to modify the family inherited exercises. The old family master and the family master didn't pay attention at first, thinking it was just messing around, but after trying to run Zhou Tian once, they were shocked to find that it was smoother than before, and the grade even went up a small level. At the age of 13, the young lady is famous in Zhongzhou. Everyone knows that there has been a sudden appearance in the Yi family. She participated in the selection of Zhongzhou Sage Academy and ranked first, which shocked everyone. But for some reason, she refused to join Sage Academy. For this reason, the dean of the academy even visited the Yi family and invited her personally. However, the young lady is extremely stubborn and refuses to listen to anyone's persuasion. In the end, the matter was settled. As he spoke, Uncle Zhang looked at Yi Qingluan and whispered, "Before this, I had never seen the young lady smile. She seemed to have some unsolvable knot in her heart, and she often frowned and was depressed. Until a few days ago, she tried her best to convince the head of the family, accompanied by Lao Chen, to go to the Eastern Wilderness Sword Sect and worship you as her teacher. Old man, this is the first time I've seen her smile." Zhang Han was in a daze for a while. It has to be said that Yi Qingluan is truly a proud girl, and her experiences from childhood to adulthood are simply legendary. And this was before her Qingluan bloodline was activated. But it's a little strange. There was a strange light in Zhang Han's eyes. Why did she smile after seeing me? Does she know that I can activate the Qingluan blood hidden in her body? Wrong. Yi Qingluan's reaction at that time was obviously unaware that her own Qingluan bloodline had returned to her ancestors, and her reaction of shock and joy was not fake at all. So why? It seems that my disciple, CHDH, has many secrets. In fact, Zhang Han later tried to detect Yi Qingluan with various random thoughts, but he couldn't detect things like this at all. What's the reward? It's nothing more than doing certain things and getting certain things. Just like cause and effect. Only with cause can there be effect. Yes, Zhang Han has gradually understood that the so-called reward system is actually called a causal system, which is more appropriate. Its function is to let Zhang Han know the effect in advance and then have the cause. Shaked his head. He didn't know what secrets Yi Qingluan had, but what he was sure of was that Yi Qingluan had no ill intentions toward him, Yi, or Jianzong, and she sincerely wanted to follow him. As for her secret, Zhang Han didn't bother to explore. Everyone has their own secret. Yi Qingluan is like this, Li Mubai's master is like this, Zhang Han is like this. He gathered his thoughts. Zhang Han looked around for a few times, and his eyes fell on an old man sitting on the threshold basking in the sun by the roadside. The wrinkles on the old man's face were like being cut with a knife, showing that he was obviously very old. But his cultivation level is not very high, he is a martial grandmaster. He stepped over and asked with a smile, "Old man, I would like to ask, do you know the origin of the name of this, Jiaishan city?" The old man looked at him twice and his eyes lit up. "Sir, are you from out of town?" "Yes." Zhang Han nodded. "I heard that there is a very ancient giant city here, so I came here to visit." "Old man, do you know why this place is called Jia City?" "Well," the old man smiled and rubbed his hands, "do I know?" Zhang Han raised his eyebrows. He casually took out a peerless grade spiritual stone filled with spiritual energy and threw it to him. Then he took out another one, weighed it in his hand, and said with a half smile, "You have to ask yourself this question." I know. The old man caught it hurriedly, took a closer look, and his eyes suddenly brightened. The origin of the name of Jiaishan city is a broken monument with the word, Jia, written on it. So, do you know where the broken monument is? Zhang Han continued to ask. Put it right in the center of the city. The old man stared intensely at the peerless grade spirit stone in Zhang Han's hand. Sir, would you like this old man to lead the way for you? City center. Zhang Han raised his eyebrows. He naturally knew the origin of the name of Jia Tian City, and he just used this topic to lead to the next question. However, he never expected that the broken monument was placed in the center of the city. So casual, Zhang Han felt curious and puzzled. He casually threw the peerless grade spirit stone to the old man, then turned and walked towards the center of the city. Sir, do you need to lead the way? The old man quickly caught the spirit stone and came closer with a smile. Need not. Zhang Han shook his head. Young master, I'll tell you the truth. When it comes to who is most familiar with this city, I would say the old man is number one. No one dares to claim second place. I can take you wherever you want to go, master. Think about it. Just one peerless grade spiritual stone. The old man followed relentlessly. No. Zhang Han frowned slightly and his tone became slightly more serious. He waved to Yi Qingluan, and she quickly walked over holding Zhang Yi's little hand. Son. The old man still refused to give up. Snapped. Zhang Han's footsteps suddenly stopped, his brows furrowed, and he glanced at the old man coldly. I said no, didn't you hear? If you follow me again, you will spit out those two spiritual stones just now. Hearing this, Han immediately stopped. Uncle Zhang on the side did not look at him from beginning to end, and followed Yi Qingluan leisurely. Looking at their backs, the old man's eyes turned cold. He took a sip, turned and left. Soon, Zhang Han and his party arrived at the center of the city and saw at a glance that there was a stone pillar carved with dragons and phoenixes in front of them, and on the stone pillar was a rather tall human sculpture. The sculpture is of a middle-aged man. He put one hand behind his back, looking up at the sky, and held a broken monument in the other hand. It clearly says, Cut. This is it. Zhang Han stared at the broken monument. Jia Jiao Monument. Damaged. The ancient and powerful religious monument has the ability to suppress luck. If you get the remnant tablet and carry it with you, you will be rewarded at a specific location, the qualification to enter the tomb of the ancient mighty one. Closing square bracket. The introduction is exactly the same as the previous ruined monument. This broken monument. Nangong Wan's voice sounded in her ears, with a little hesitation. It seems to be another part of the piece I got before. Good. Zhang Han smiled. The fracture marks of the two broken monuments are completely consistent and can be pieced together. Who is this sculpture? Zhang Han moved his eyes to the human sculpture and looked at it for a few times. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but vaguely, he seemed to see a flash of blood in the sculpture's eyes. Something's wrong. Zhang Han squinted his eyes. His vitality is extremely strong now. How could he have hallucinations for no reason? This statue is a bit weird. The sculpture of Luo Heng, the first-generation lord of Jiaishan City, was made 80,000 years ago, when Luo Heng was about to expire, killing millions of babies, taking their heart blood, and refining it with sorcery. Its evil soul hides in the sculpture and absorbs the power of faith. Destroy it and you will get rewards. Merit. Closing square bracket. Zhang Han was startled. Immediately, a hint of coldness suddenly flashed in his eyes. He thinks to himself that he is not a good person, but in life, there are things he can do and things he cannot do as well as he can. For his own selfish gain, he actually killed millions of babies and practiced evil arts. Luo Heng, the first-generation city lord of Jiaishan City, was simply insane and deserved death. When Zhang Han flicked his fingers, and a sharp sword energy burst out, hitting the sculpture instantly. However, it only shook and was not damaged. Kindness. He frowned and was about to take action again when Uncle Zhang next to him quickly stopped him and asked with astonishment on his face, "Master, what are you doing?" "Destroy the sculpture," Zhang Han said lightly. "It cannot be destroyed." Uncle Zhang's eyes were twitching and he said hurriedly, "Jiaishan City has existed for tens of thousands of years, connecting the trade between the eastern wilderness and the northern territory. Its heritage is extraordinary and even surpasses that of your sword sect. All the previous city lords are saints. This sculpture is the first-generation city lord of Jiaishan City. If you destroy it, you will make a big enemy. All saints." A trace of surprise flashed in Zhang Han's eyes. So, isn't this Jiaishan City even more powerful than the sword sect? At this time, the eyes of everyone around him fell on Zhang Han. After all, they were all practitioners, and they immediately noticed the scene just now. Let me guess, is this person crazy? It looks like he must be the young master of a certain family. Tisk, you actually want to destroy the sculpture. You really want to offend Jia Tiancheng to death. He is dead. Although the sculpture is not damaged, this move is already a blasphemy to the first-generation Jiaishan City Lord, and the City Lord's mansion will not let him go. Passers-by were talking a lot. Over the years, some people have also stared at the broken monument on the sculpture's hand. But the final ending is very miserable. Young master, don't worry. Uncle Zhang stared at the sculpture carefully and breathed a sigh of relief. The sculpture is not damaged. In addition, with the respect of the Yi family and the Zhanzong, the Luo family of Jiaishan City will not go too far. The most important thing is to compensate them for some of their treasures. Fortunately, the sculpture left no trace. Otherwise, even if it's the Yi family's face, it can't be saved today. At this moment, when there was another crisp sound. With an expressionless expression, Zhang Han flicked out a sword energy with his fingers. This time it was more powerful, shaking the sculpture, and a faint white mark appeared on it. Uncle Zhang was stunned. On the side, Yi Qingluan frowned slightly confused. She knew that the master was definitely not a reckless person, but why would he do such a thing? I was thinking in my mind. Sudden, the memories in Yi Qingluan's mind were recalled. She vaguely remembered that about 10 years later, a very strange thing happened in Jiaishan City. Overnight, everyone in the city died. Except the city lord's mansion. Since then, Jiaishan City has become a ghost town. The cold clouds have always oppressed this huge city. Every time in the dead of night, the sound of ghosts crying can be heard. This place has almost become a forbidden area for the living. Later, Yi Qingluan heard that Jia Tian City was wiped out by a mysterious being. She had never been exposed to this matter, so she didn't think of it at first. Until just now, Zhang Han suddenly wanted to destroy the sculpture. Yi Qingluan was confused and remembered this memory that she had never paid attention to. Could it be that the disaster that destroyed the city 10 years later was because of this statue? Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes flashed, and 2 blue flames appeared in his pupils, swaying faintly. Next moment, she vaguely saw that the sculpture was filled with billowing yin qi. There is indeed a problem. Yi Qingluan's heart trembled slightly. This yin energy was extremely strong, even she had never seen it before in her previous life, and it was hidden very deeply. If she hadn't been Qingluan, and the Qingluan fire in her eyes could shine on these things, she would not have been able to detect it at all. Since the disaster of destroying the city will break out here in 10 years, it means that the previous master did not destroy the sculpture. Yi Qingluan said to himself. At this time, seeing Zhang Han attack the sculpture again and leaving white marks on the sculpture, Uncle Zhang was stunned. The surrounding area also became quiet. Everyone feels that the storm is coming, and the city lord's palace will be furious. 2, 3, 3 is really strong. Quote, Zhang Han murmured to himself. Thinking about it, the first-generation lord of Jiaishan City should be powerful. The statue he cast using secret methods must not be a mortal thing, and he cannot break it with his strength. Boom! A terrifying aura suddenly came over and filled the entire Jiaishan City, suffocating everyone's breath. How brave! In the sky, a huge face appeared, staring coldly at Zhang Han below. The loud voice was like thunder. This is your first time to attack the ancestor statue. For the sake of the semi-saint beside you, and ignored it. But you have desecrated the statues of your ancestors again and again. Boy, do you really think I can protect you even if you have half a chance? The real monster. People in the city looked shocked. The person who can call himself semi-saint is definitely a martial saint. Although they knew that the city lord's mansion would not give up, they still did not expect that a powerful martial saint would actually appear. What's more, that inconspicuous old man turned out to be a fat monk. Whose young master is this? Semi-saint is accompanying him. Uncle Zhang's expression changed slightly. He took a step forward, looked up at the sky, and said in a deep voice, Junior Zhang Tianlin, acting head of the Yi family in Zhongzhou, has met Senior Saint. Zhongzhou Yi family. After a moment of silence, the huge face spoke coldly again. I asked how someone could be so bold. It turns out he is a descendant of the Yi family. However, this is not Zhongzhou, let alone the Yi family. Man, I have detained it. You go back and let the head of the Yi family come and pick them up in person. Hear the words. Uncle Zhang's pupils shrank. Senior Saint. No need to say more. There was a faint sneer on the huge face. Although the Yi family in Zhongzhou is strong, my Luo family is not afraid. Let the head of your family come to collect people in person, otherwise, he will stay here forever. At this moment, Zhang Han's figure suddenly flashed, and under the gaze of countless eyes, he appeared in the statue's hand holding half of the broken monument. Bo! A soft sound. He forcefully pulled half of the broken monument up. Everyone. Uncle Zhang. Huge face. There was a brief silence. Asshole. The huge face in the sky showed an angry expression, and the roar resounded like thunder through the sky. In an instant, the color of the sky and the earth changed, and the rolling clouds covered the sky, and the evil spirit filled the sky. Boom! The terrifying pressure swept down, causing all creatures within thousands of miles to tremble. The people in the city were even more unbearable, with 90% of them lying on the ground, because if they continued to stand, the pressure alone would be enough to crush them. Zhang Bo's face suddenly turned green. Beside him, Yi Qingluan's pretty face was solemn, holding an exquisite jade talisman in his hand. Above Zhang Yi's head, the saplings emitted a faint halo, shrouding her. At this moment, although Zhang Han also felt extremely terrifying pressure, he had the 5 elements royal magic pearl that absorbed enough elemental energy on his body, so it was nothing for the moment. He landed on the ground, and with a flash of light in his hand, he took out the remaining steel with the words, Teaching Steel, written on it. That is, in the sky, a huge face showed surprise, another broken monument. And the eyes of the tall sculpture revealed a pale green light, staring at the ruined monument. Boom! A giant hand suddenly appeared and grabbed Zhang Han fiercely. Almost at the same moment, Zhang Han suddenly brought the two broken monuments together. Boom! The giant hand grabbed the empty space and slapped it on the ground. The figures of Zhang Han and others have disappeared from the spot, as if they had never appeared. The huge face in the sky showed extreme anger and disappeared immediately. Only the frightened people in the city were left. Gray mist spreads everywhere, and stone tablets can be vaguely seen standing like figures. What is this place? There was a halo around Uncle Zhang's body, and his eyes were alert. This is another space that Nangong entered back then, where the forest of stealth she saw is. Zhang Han's faint voice sounded from the side. Good. Nangong Wan's ghost body floated out. She looked around and said firmly, "This is it." Hear the words. Uncle Zhang was slightly startled. He didn't feel the fluctuation of space power at all just now, and he was actually teleported to another space. Such unfathomable space attainments are terrifying. Immediately, he remembered what happened just now and looked at Zhang Han helplessly. "Master, you are too reckless. You actually snatched something from the hands of a martial saint. My old bones were almost beaten to death. Isn't this okay?" Zhang Han had an understatement on his face. Before he attacked the sculpture for the second time, he already had an idea in his mind. Through the system, he saw that if the two stone tablets were put together, they would be instantly teleported to this space, and at the same time, they could teleport the person he wanted to teleport. If it's only $50, there's no other way but to wait until midnight, and you have to wait for the right time. 30 years ago, the reason why Nangong Wan and Ji Yulingyun were able to come in was, on the one hand, the right timing, and on the other hand, it was actually a mistake. If I had to find a reason, I can only say that it was probably because they were both swordsmen. Disciple. What's next? Uncle Zhang smiled bitterly. "We can't stay here forever. As long as we leave, the breath will be sensed by the martial saint the moment we leave. How can we escape? His mood is complicated. I thought that with my semi-saint cultivation, I could basically walk sideways. Apart from anything else, I should be able to protect my own young lady, not to mention that few people outside would dare to touch the eldest lady of the Yi family." But what he never expected was that Zhang Han was so capable. Some time ago, when he was in Sword Sect, he only offended semi-saint, but he could still withstand it and was not afraid of it. Good now, not only did he not restrain himself, he even got worse and even got into martial saint. Who the hell can withstand this? Not urgent. Zhang Han remained calm. When he was checking the information just now, he was not thinking about how to enter this space, but how to deal with the current situation and resolve the crisis. The only solution the system gave at that time was put the Jijiao monument together completely. That is to say, Zhang Han stared at the forest of steles looming in the gray fog. The real solution lies in this gray fog space. Gray mist floated around him, and high or low tombstones were looming in the mist. There was no sound around, and you could even hear the heartbeats of everyone. Nangong Wan whispered, "This place is exactly the same as when I came here 30 years ago. The gray fog stretches as far as the eye can see. No matter how you walk, you can't reach the end. There are tombstones everywhere. What the hell is this place?" The green flame burning in Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes went out. She found that her Qingluan fire completely lost its effect here and could not penetrate the gray mist at all. Kindness. Uncle Zhang suddenly trembled. He turned his head sharply and stared at the gray fog behind him, with a look of uncertainty on his face. "Be careful, there seems to be something else here. You feel it too." Nangong Wan looked at Uncle Zhang in surprise and said, "When I came here, I felt like I was being stared at by something. It was gloomy and cold, but nothing happened. I thought it was an illusion. It's not a hallucination." Uncle Zhang looked solemn and said in a low voice, "I can feel the deep malice in that gaze. It is hidden in the gray garden." Everyone was awestruck. Things that live in a place like this are definitely not a good thing. Zhang Han walked to a tombstone and took a closer look. He found that just as Nangong Wan said, there were indeed no words on it. 2. He thought to himself, it would be nice to have a tombstone next to the tomb of Lord Tongtian. How could anyone leave their names? Besides, there are so many tombstones. Zhang Han suspected that these were probably all dead Jia Zhao disciples. Unimaginable. What kind of horror happened in the past years that would cause existences like Lord Tongtian to perish? Nangong. Zhang Han turned to look at Nangong Wan, who was floating aside. Where are you going? I have no idea. Nangong Wan smiled bitterly and shook his head. In this space, it is impossible to distinguish between east, west and north. We also wandered around all over the place before we found the big tomb, guessing that it was located in the center. Then walk around. Zhang Han nodded casually. They walked aimlessly among the forest of steles, with gray fog everywhere, as if there would be no end. Zhang Han occasionally stopped and looked at the tombstone next to him. He used the system to test it many times, but the results were all without any return, and what was buried in the tomb was not clearly stated, only that it was the corpse of an ancient creature. Someone. Suddenly, Uncle Zhang stopped suddenly and shouted softly. He stared at the front left, fiery spiritual power flowing from his body, enveloping everyone, with a nervous look on his face. Everyone looked around quickly. That is. Zhang Han stared at a shadow. He was standing in front of a tombstone, smearing something on the tombstone with his hand. He seems to be writing on the tombstone. Beside, Yi Qingluan's beautiful eyes flashed with two green flames, staring at the shadow, and whispered. Writing. What to write on a tombstone? An epitaph. When everyone was puzzled, the figure suddenly turned his head and stared at them. Careful. Uncle Zhang swallowed, and cold sweat broke out on his forehead. This person is much scarier than Martial Saint. His breath is unpredictable, but the traces that occasionally show out are terrifying. The words have not yet finished. The figure suddenly disappeared and appeared directly in front of them before anyone could react. The corners of Zhang Han's eyes twitched. The man appeared right in front of him, very close. He was in tattered clothes, with disheveled hair, a long beard, a dark face, slightly chubby cheeks, and a pair of dull eyes under his messy hair, staring at him blankly. It made his hair stand on end. The spiritual shield released by Uncle Zhang is completely useless. The other party walked right in. Do not move. Seeing Uncle Zhang on the side preparing to take action, Zhang Han immediately sent a message to stop him. The ancient power is temporarily undetectable due to the huge gap in cultivation. The great power was confused and unconscious. If you take action to anger it, you will be rewarded. Death. Ancient power. The corners of Zhang Han's eyes twitched slightly, and his back was soaked with cold sweat. Where did this person come from? How could he survive from ancient times to the present? How terrifying would his cultivation be? Is the old fool a seductress? The most important is, there is a martial emperor corpse demon in the bronze temple, but if the ancient power is angered, the reward given by the system is death. In other words, the opponent's strength far exceeds that of the martial emperor. No one dared to move. The strongest Zhangbo and World Tree Tang Yaoyao can actually feel the power of this person even more. It's like they are all a drop of water, facing the Japanese film King Yang. Sudden, the man's eyes moved and he slowly looked behind Zhang Han and others. Next moment, his figure disappeared from the spot, and almost at the same moment, a sharp howl came from behind. Everyone subconsciously looked back and saw that the man was holding a gray-black shadow in his hand. He balled it into a ball and stuffed it directly into his mouth. I'm afraid it was that gray-black shadow that was staring at us before. Uncle Zhang suddenly said. This mysterious and powerful creature just now was obviously a little confused. His eyes were dull, and there was no emotion in his eyes. But at the beginning, the sight he felt was full of malice. Obviously not the same person. It seems that gray-black shadow should be an evil spirit wandering here. This mysterious existence saw it and swallowed it in one bite. Let's go. Zhang Han took a deep breath. The man was engrossed in devouring the gray-black shadows, seemingly forgetting about them for the time being. Passing by the tall tombstone where the crazy powerful man stood, Zhang Han glanced subconsciously and found that there were writings on it. He thought it was carved by the crazy powerful man just now. But it seems that he hasn't finished carving yet, so there is only one word. A word, gold. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.